I never told my daughter Jasmine that my monthly passive income from Rhodes Logistics exceeds $70,000. To her, I am just Franklin, a retired dock worker with a bad leg and a meager pension. She has no idea that the shipping containers she sees at the port bear my initials. Last night, my son-in-law Ethan invited me to a dinner with his parents, the illustrious Huntingtons. I wanted to see how they would treat a man they believed to be beneath them, so I decided to play the part of the naive, ruined father. I put on my faded khaki jacket, the one with the oil stain on the cuff, and drove my rusting pickup truck to the venue. But as soon as I walked through the gilded doors of Ciel, a restaurant I secretly own, I realized this was not just a dinner. It was a setup. They did not know who they were messing with. They did not know that the hand they refused to shake was the same hand that could sign the foreclosure on their mansion. Before I tell you how I bought their debt and left them with nothing but their arrogance, let me know which city you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that respect should be given to everyone regardless of what they drive. My 2005 Ford F-150 is a beast of a machine, but it has seen better days. The muffler has a hole in it, causing the engine to cough and sputter like a dying animal. I love this truck. It reminds me of where I came from. It reminds me of the days when I worked 16 hours straight to build my empire from a single warehouse. But as I turned into the circular driveway of Ciel, my truck sounded like a gunshot in a library. The restaurant was a palace of glass and steel glowing warm in the evening light. A line of black sedans and silver coupes idled near the entrance. I pulled up behind a gleaming Bentley. The difference was comical. My truck bed was scratched and dented while the car in front of me looked like it had been polished with silk. I put the truck in park, and the engine let out one final loud bang before dying. A young valet attendant in a crisp burgundy uniform rushed over. He didn't open my door. He stood a few feet away, waving his hands as if he were trying to scare away a stray dog. I rolled down the window. The manual crank squeaked in protest. "Good evening, son," I said, leaning out. "I am here for a dinner reservation with the Huntington family." The valet looked at my truck, then at my face, and then back at the truck. His nose wrinkled. "Sir, you cannot park this vehicle here. This area is for valet guests only. Deliveries are around the back near the dumpster." I gripped the steering wheel. My knuckles were rough and scarred the hands of a working man. "I am not a delivery driver," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I am a guest. Here are my keys." I held out the keychain. It was a simple metal ring, no leather fob, no electronic unlock button. The valet actually took a step back, putting his hands behind his back. "I am sorry, sir, but I cannot accept this vehicle," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It is a liability. It is leaking oil, and quite frankly, it disturbs the ambiance our other guests pay for. There is a public lot 4 blocks down. You can walk from there." My knee throbbed. I had shattered it 20 years ago when a crane cable snapped at the docks. Walking 4 blocks in the cold evening air would be agony. I looked at the valet's name tag. Kevin. I memorized it. "Are you sure about that, Kevin?" I asked one last time. "Positive," he sneered. "Move it. Now. You are holding up the line." I nodded slowly. I shifted the truck back into gear. I did not argue. I did not pull out my platinum card or demand to see the manager. That would have ruined the test. I drove out of the valet circle, the engine sputtering loudly, drawing stares from a couple stepping out of a Porsche. I found a spot in the public lot blocks away, nestled between a dumpster and a graffiti-covered wall. The walk back to the restaurant was brutal. The cold wind bit through my thin khaki jacket. Every step sent a sharp jolt of pain up my right leg, forcing me to limp heavily. By the time I reached the glass doors of Ciel, I was out of breath and my forehead was slick with sweat. I caught my reflection in the glass. I looked tired. I looked old. I looked exactly like the poor, helpless burden they wanted me to be. I pushed the door open and stepped into the lobby. The warmth of the heater hit me along with the smell of expensive perfume and truffle oil. Standing near the hostess stand was Ethan, my son-in-law. He was wearing a navy blue suit that probably cost more than my truck. He was checking his watch, tapping his foot impatiently. When he saw me, his expression didn't soften. It hardened. "You are late, Frank," he said. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask why I was limping. He didn't offer a hand. "I had to park down the street," I said, rubbing my aching knee. "The valet wouldn't take the truck." Ethan let out a sharp sigh, rolling his eyes toward the ceiling. "I told you to take a taxi, Frank." I specifically said, "Take a taxi. Why do you always have to be so difficult?" Do you have any idea who is eating here tonight? My parents are trying to close a deal with investors. We cannot have you showing up looking like that. He stepped closer, reaching out to flick a piece of imaginary lint off my shoulder. The gesture was aggressive. It wasn't about cleaning me off, it was about asserting dominance. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my scuffed work boots. Jesus, Frank. Those boots. Is that mud? It is just some dust, Ethan, I said, keeping my head lowered. I was working in the garden this morning. You are not a gardener anymore, Frank. You are my father-in-law. Try to have some dignity, he hissed. Just try not to touch anything. And for God's sake, don't talk about your old job at the docks. Nobody wants to hear about shipping containers and unions. Just nod and smile. Can you do that? I will try my best, I whispered. Ethan shook his head and turned around, walking briskly toward the dining area. He didn't check to see if I could keep up. I limped behind him, passing tables filled with people laughing and clinking crystal glasses. I saw the way they looked at me. A quick glance, then a look of pity or confusion, then a quick turn back to their plates. I was an anomaly in their perfect world. We approached a large circular table near the window, but we didn't stop there. That was not our table. Our table was further back in a semi-private alcove. Sitting there were Richard and Catherine Huntington. They looked like royalty from a fading kingdom. Richard had silver hair slicked back, wearing a tuxedo. Catherine was draped in pearls, her face pulled tight from one too many surgeries. Jasmine, my sweet daughter, was sitting between them. She looked small. Her shoulders were hunched. When she saw me, her eyes lit up with relief, but also fear. She started to stand up to greet me, but Catherine placed a hand on her forearm, pinning her down. "Sit, Jasmine." Catherine said, her voice like ice. "You are pregnant. You shouldn't be jumping up and down." Jasmine sank back into her chair. "Hi, Daddy," she mouthed silently. I reached the table. "Good evening, Richard." "Catherine," I said, offering a smile. Richard didn't stand up. He didn't even turn his body toward me. He just lifted his chin slightly, acknowledging my existence with the bare minimum of effort required by physics. "Frank," Richard grunted. "You made it." We were about to order. Catherine pulled a silk handkerchief from her purse and pressed it lightly to her nose as if a foul odor had just wafted in. She looked at my jacket, then at my boots, and finally met my eyes with a gaze full of cold amusement. "You are looking rustic, Franklin," she said. "Did you get lost on the way? You look like you walked here." "I did walk, actually," I said. "Oh," Catherine laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "How quaint. Well, sit down." But not there. I had started to pull out the chair next to Richard. He slammed his hand down on the empty seat. "Not here, Frank," Richard said. "This seat faces the main dining room. The mayor is eating 3 tables away. We don't want to distract him." Ethan grabbed my arm and guided me to a chair on the far side of the table. It was tucked into the corner facing the wall. My back would be to the entire restaurant. I was being hidden, like a dirty secret, like a stain they couldn't wash out. "Sit here," Ethan commanded. "You will be more comfortable, less exposed." I sat down. The chair was comfortable Italian leather imported. I knew that because I had signed the invoice for these chairs 6 months ago. I looked around the table. Richard and Catherine were already back to their conversation, discussing their summer house in the Hamptons. Ethan was signaling the waiter, snapping his fingers. Jasmine reached under the table and squeezed my hand. Her hand was trembling. I squeezed back. I wanted to tell her that it was okay. I wanted to tell her that this corner seat was not a prison but a throne in disguise. But I couldn't. Not yet. The waiter approached, a tall man with a notepad. He looked at Richard, then at Ethan, then at Catherine. He didn't look at me. "Water for the table," the waiter asked. "Sparkling or still sparkling," Richard said. "And bring a bottle of the 1982 Chateau Margaux." The waiter nodded and turned to leave. "Excuse me," I said, raising my hand slightly. "Could I just get a glass of tap water?" The table went silent. Richard slowly turned his head to look at me. The vein in his temple throbbed. Catherine let out a sharp sigh. "For heaven's sake," Frank, Richard snapped. "Don't be embarrassing. We are drinking sparkling. You will drink sparkling. It gives me gas." I lied, making my voice sound weak and wavering. Ethan leaned in, his voice a harsh whisper. Just drink the damn water, Frank. We are paying for it. I lowered my hand. I slumped my shoulders, making myself look smaller, more defeated. I let them see the victory in their eyes. They thought they had crushed me. They thought they had put the old, poor dock worker in his place. They had no idea that I was memorizing every insult, every sneer, every second of humiliation. The game had begun, and they were already losing. They just didn't know it yet. The menu in front of me was heavy bound in leather. I opened it, preparing for the next act of their cruel play. I knew exactly what was coming next. They were going to make me feel the weight of every dollar sign on that page, and I was going to let them. Here's the detailed script for Part 2, written in English, optimized for AI voice, reading no special characters, no headers, continuous emotional flow, and following the exact Min Dan Ong Dan style. The heavy leather-bound menu felt cold in my hands. It smelled of new calfskin and old money. I opened it slowly, letting my eyes widen as I scanned the prices. I did not need to act too much. Even though I owned this building and the land it stood on, seeing a $120 price tag for a ribeye steak still offended my working-class roots. I let out a low whistle loud enough for the table to hear. "Good Lord," I said, adjusting my broken glasses. "Look at these prices. $100 for a piece of meat. Does it come with the rest of the cow?" I looked up, expecting a chuckle or perhaps a shared moment of amusement. Instead, I was met with silence. Richard was busy swirling his wine, staring at the crimson liquid as if looking for a reason to fire the winemaker. Ethan was texting under the table. It was Catherine who finally acknowledged me. She lowered her menu just enough to reveal her eyes, which were narrowed in disgust. She did not smile. She did not blink. She simply looked at me as if I were a stain on her pristine white tablecloth. "Order whatever you want." "Franklin," she said, her voice sharp and loud enough for the neighboring table to hear, "do not worry about the cost. We know you cannot afford it. Just think of this as our charity tax deduction for the year. Besides, at your age, who knows if you will ever get to eat a meal like this again. Eat up. It might be your last supper before the nursing home." Her cruelty was casual. It was practiced. I felt Jasmine stiffen beside me. She opened her mouth to defend me, but I placed a hand on her knee under the table. I gave her a gentle squeeze. "Not yet," I signaled. I turned to the waiter who had been standing there with his pen hovering, looking bored. "I will just have the French onion soup, please," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "And maybe some extra bread if it is free." The waiter smirked. He took the menu from my hands with a quick snatching motion. "Very good, sir. The soup, and for the rest of the table." Richard ordered the lobster thermidor. Catherine ordered the filet mignon, medium rare. Ethan ordered the truffle risotto. They ordered like kings and queens without even looking at the prices. When the waiter left, the invisible wall went up. It is a technique rich people use to exclude those they deem unworthy. They do not tell you to leave. They simply pretend you do not exist. They began to speak in a language of exclusion. "So, Richard, how is the new Sunseeker performing?" Ethan asked, leaning forward with a desperate eagerness. "Did you take it out to the marina last weekend?" Richard took a sip of his wine, savoring the attention more than the vintage. "It is decent," he said. "The twin engines are powerful, but the stabilization system is a bit jerky in rough water. I am thinking of upgrading to the 80-foot model next season. This one feels a bit cramped for entertaining." "I know a thing or two about marine engines," I said, leaning in. I tried to inject a tone of helpfulness into my voice. "If the stabilizer is jerky, it might be the hydraulic pressure sensor. On those models, they tend to get clogged with salt if you do not flush them properly." I stopped. I had made a mistake. I had spoken. Richard stopped chewing. He placed his fork down with a deliberate clatter. He turned his head slowly, looking at me with a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. It was the look a master gives a dog that has just barked at the dinner table. "Frank," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "we are talking about luxury yachts, not fishing trawlers, not tugboats. I do not need advice from a man whose only experience with water is probably a leaking roof." But I just thought I stammered. "Stop thinking," Richard snapped. "It gives you wrinkles. This is an adult conversation about assets and liquidity. When you have an asset worth more than $500, feel free to join in. Until then, enjoy your soup." He turned his back to me. Literally, he shifted his chair so that his shoulder blocked my view of the table. Ethan laughed. It was a nervous, hollow laugh, the sound of a man trying to please his owner. "Yeah, Frank, stick to what you know," Ethan said. "Maybe tell us about how to fix a lawnmower later." I looked down at my soup, which had just arrived. It was hot, steaming, and smelled of caramelized onions and rich beef broth. But as I picked up my spoon, my hand shaking with a mixture of feigned age and suppressed rage, I lost my appetite. I took a sip. It tasted like ash. I watched them eat. They tore into their lobsters and steaks with a savagery that betrayed their refined clothes. They ate like wolves disguised as sheep. But the worst was yet to come. They had insulted my poverty. They had insulted my intelligence. Now they needed a new target. And there she was, sitting quietly beside me, trying to make herself invisible. Catherine wiped the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. She looked at Jasmine. She didn't look at her face. She looked at her dress. It was a simple floral print dress bought off the rack at a department store. It was modest, comfortable, and in my eyes, beautiful. But to Catherine, it was an affront. "Jasmine, dear," Catherine said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Is that the maternity dress I sent you? The silk one from Paris?" Jasmine looked down at her plate. "No, Catherine. That one didn't fit right. It was too tight around the waist." Catherine sighed a long, dramatic exhalation of disappointment. "Pity. This thing you are wearing, it is so pedestrian. It looks like something a farm girl would wear to a county fair." She leaned in closer, her eyes glittering with malice. "You know appearance matters, Jasmine. Ethan is a rising star in this city. He needs a wife who looks the part, not someone who looks like she just finished milking cows. You are starting to look just like your father, worn out, cheap." The air left the room. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I felt a heat rise up my neck, hotter than the soup, hotter than the anger I had felt for myself. "Insult me and I will calculate my revenge. Insult my daughter and I will burn your world to the ground." I looked at Ethan. I waited for him to defend his wife. I waited for him to say that she looked beautiful, that she was carrying his child, that he loved her. Ethan took a bite of his risotto. He chewed. He swallowed. He took a sip of water. "Mom is right, babe," Ethan said, not looking at her. "You should really try harder. We have an image to maintain. Maybe you can go shopping with Mom next week. Get some real clothes." Jasmine dropped her fork. It hit the plate with a sharp clang. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back, terrified to cry in front of these monsters. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Daddy, please," she seemed to say. "Don't make a scene." I gripped the edge of the table. My knuckles turned white. The wood groaned under my grip. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to flip this table over. I wanted to tell them that the dress Jasmine was wearing cost $40, but the woman wearing it was priceless. I wanted to tell them that the suit Ethan was wearing was bought with a loan I had secretly approved. But I didn't. I forced my hand to relax. I forced my face into a mask of shame. "She is a good girl," I mumbled, staring at my soup. "She tries her best." Catherine laughed. "Trying is for losers, Frank. Results are for winners. And right now, the result sitting at this table is undeniably disappointing." She signaled the waiter for another bottle of wine. I picked up my spoon again. I ate the soup. I swallowed the insults. I let them fuel me. Every word they said was another nail in their coffin. They thought they were breaking us. They had no idea they were forging steel. The dinner was far from over and the check was coming, but they would be the ones paying it. The mood at the table shifted so abruptly it gave me whiplash. One moment I was being mocked for my choice of soup, and the next Ethan was reaching across the table with the bottle of expensive wine. He filled my glass to the brim. It was a clumsy pour, the action of a man who was trying too hard to be gracious. The dark red liquid threatened to spill over the rim. He smiled at me. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "Here, Frank," Ethan said, his voice dropping an octave to sound serious and manly. "Drink up. We should not have been so harsh earlier. We are family after all, and family looks out for each other." I stared at the wine. I did not touch it. In my experience, when a man who has spent the last hour insulting you suddenly offers you a drink, he is not trying to quench your thirst. He is trying to lower your guard. I looked at Jasmine. She was staring at her plate, her hands twisting a napkin into a tight knot. She knew what was coming. She was ashamed, but she was too afraid of her husband and his parents to warn me. "Thank you, Ethan," I said slowly, keeping my hands in my lap. "I am not really much of a wine drinker. It gives me a headache." Ethan laughed a sharp barking sound. Nonsense, Frank. You just have not had the good stuff. This bottle costs more than your monthly pension check. You should enjoy the finer things in life while you can. Speaking of finer things, that is actually what I wanted to talk to you about. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Richard and Catherine stopped eating. They put down their silverware and watched me with predatory intensity. The trap was about to be sprung. Frank Ethan continued, his eyes locking onto mine. You know, Jasmine and I are expecting a baby soon. Your grandchild. And we have been thinking a lot about the future, about security, about legacy. We want to make sure this child has the best life possible. Private schools, Ivy League colleges, a trust fund. That sounds nice, I said, feigning innocence. I am sure you two will provide all of that. You seem to be doing very well for yourselves. We are, Ethan said quickly. We are doing great. But in this economy, you can never be too safe. That is why my father and I have started a new venture, the Riverfront Development Project. It is going to revitalize the entire industrial district. We are talking about luxury condos, a marina, high-end retail. It is going to be huge, Frank, a gold mine. He paused, waiting for me to react. I blinked slowly behind my crooked glasses. That sounds like a big project, I said, but I do not see what it has to do with me. I am just a retired dock worker. I do not have money to invest in condos. Ethan exchanged a glance with Richard. It was a look of frustration. They thought I was too stupid to pick up on the hint. No, Frank, you do not need money, Ethan said, speaking slower now as if explaining quantum physics to a toddler. You have something better than money. You have an asset. That old piece of land you own, the one out by the old cannery, the one with the weeds and the rusted fence. I felt a cold spike of anger in my chest. That land was not just weeds and fences. It was 5 acres of prime industrial real estate with direct access to the deep water port. I had bought it 30 years ago for pennies when the city was bankrupt. Now it was the only access point for their precious project. Without my land, their luxury condos would have no road access. They would be landlocked and worthless. But I could not let them know I knew that. Oh, that old lot, I said, scratching my head. It is just dirt, Ethan. I was thinking of planting a vegetable garden there next spring, maybe some tomatoes. Ethan forced a laugh. It sounded painful. Tomatoes. That is cute, Frank. Really cute. But we are offering you a chance to turn those tomatoes into real security. We want to buy the land from you, Frank. We want to take that burden off your hands. I picked up my spoon and stirred my soup. I let the silence stretch. I let them sweat. They needed this land. I could smell their desperation under their expensive cologne. I do not know, Ethan, I mumbled. That land belonged to my father. He left it to me. I promised him I would never sell it. It has sentimental value. This was the trigger. The mention of sentimentality made Richard's face turn a deep shade of purple. He could not hold back his contempt any longer. Sentimental value, Richard spat out, slamming his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. People at nearby tables turned to look. Ethan tried to calm him down. Dad, wait, let me handle this. No, Ethan, Richard roared, ignoring his son. I am done dancing around with this imbecile. Look at him. He does not even know what the word asset means. He is talking about tomatoes while we are talking about millions of dollars in development. Richard turned his cold, dead eyes on me. Listen to me, Frank. And listen good. That land is a dump. It is a breeding ground for rats and mosquitoes. You are sitting on a pile of garbage and calling it a gold mine. We are not asking you for a favor. We are doing you a favor. We are offering to clean up your mess. But my father, I started to say, making my voice tremble. Your father is dead. Richard cut me off brutally. And if he were alive, he would smack you for being so stubborn. You are holding back progress, Frank. You are holding back your own daughter's future. Do you want your grandchild to grow up knowing their grandfather was too selfish to help the family? I looked at Jasmine. She was crying silently now. Tears rolled down her cheeks and dropped onto her expensive maternity dress. She looked terrified. Dad, please, Jasmine whispered. Just listen to them. I looked back at Richard. I let my shoulders slump. I let the mask of the beaten, broken old man slide fully into place. I do not want to be a burden, I whispered. I do not understand business. Richard let out a huff of satisfaction. He thought he had broken me. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. He tossed it onto the table. It slid across the white tablecloth and stopped right in front of my soup bowl. Finally, Richard said, adjusting his cufflinks, "Now we are getting somewhere." "Read it, Frank." Or can you even read without those broken glasses? I picked up the document. My hands shook. I brought it close to my face, squinting. It was a standard purchase agreement. I scanned the legal jargon, my eyes skipping over the clauses I already knew were predatory. I was looking for one thing, the number, the price. I found it on the second page. I stared at it. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Or screaming. $50,000. They were offering me $50,000 for land that was appraised at $5 million last week. They were trying to steal 99% of the value. It was not just a lowball offer. It was a robbery. It was an insult to my intelligence, my life's work, and my dignity. I lowered the paper. I looked at Ethan. He was smiling again, that same shark smile. $50,000, I said softly. That is right, Frank, Ethan said, nodding enthusiastically. 50 grand. Imagine what you could do with that kind of money. You could fix your roof. You could pay off your medical bills. You could buy a new truck. Hell, you could take a cruise. It is a lot of money for a guy like you. A guy like me. The phrase hung in the air. I looked at Richard. He was checking his watch, already bored with the transaction. Is that all I asked? The table went quiet. They looked at me in confusion. They had expected me to jump for joy. They had expected me to kiss their rings in gratitude. Excuse me, Catherine said, speaking for the first time in minutes. Did you just ask, is that all? I nodded. It seems a bit low. I heard that land prices are going up. Richard laughed. It was a cruel, mocking sound. He leaned back in his chair and shook his head. Unbelievable, Richard said. You offer a beggar a feast and he asks for dessert. Frank, listen to me. That land is worthless to anyone but us. We are the only ones with the capital to develop it. If we walk away, you get zero. You get nothing. You keep your weeds and your rats. But 50,000, I mumbled. It will not last long. The nursing home costs... Oh, for God's sake, Richard snapped. He reached into his pocket again. He pulled out his wallet. He pulled out a checkbook. He scribbled something furiously. He ripped the check out and slammed it on top of the contract. There, Richard said. Another $5,000. Consider it a signing bonus. Go buy yourself some new clothes. You look like a scarecrow. $55,000, Ethan said, beaming. That is our final offer, Frank. Take it or leave it. But if you leave it, do not expect us to come to Sunday dinner anymore. Do not expect to see your grandchild. The threat was clear. Sign the paper or lose your family. They were holding my love for my daughter hostage for a piece of land. I looked at the check. $5,000. He threw it at me like I was a stripper he was tipping. He thought $5,000 was life-changing money for me. I spent $5,000 on cigars last month. I looked at Jasmine. She was not looking at me. She was looking at her husband, her eyes filled with fear. She was trapped in this family just as much as they were trying to trap me. Okay, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Okay, what Richard demanded. Okay, I will sign, I said. But I need a pen. Ethan practically tripped over himself to hand me a gold-plated fountain pen. I took it. It felt heavy, expensive. I held it over the paper. The ink was black like their hearts. But before I sign, I said, pausing with the pen tip hovering over the line, I need to use the restroom. My stomach. The soup. I am not feeling well. Richard groaned. He threw his hands up in the air. Go, he shouted. Just go. But if you are not back in 5 minutes, the deal is off. And take the contract with you. I do not want you getting any ideas about running away. I stood up slowly, clutching the contract and the check to my chest like a lifeline. I limped away from the table, my right leg dragging on the carpet. I could hear them laughing as I walked away. Can you believe him? I heard Ethan say. He almost cried over $5,000. Pathetic, Richard replied. Totally pathetic. I pushed open the door to the restroom. The heavy door swung shut behind me, cutting off their laughter. The silence of the tiled room enveloped me. I walked to the mirror. I looked at myself. The hunched shoulders straightened. The look of fear vanished from my eyes. The old, weak Franklin Rhodes disappeared. I took the check for $5,000 and tore it into tiny pieces. I dropped them into the trash can. Then I pulled out my secure satellite phone. It was time to make a call. It was time to show them what a real businessman looks like. They wanted to play games. Fine. I was about to change the rules. I looked at the check sitting on the crisp white tablecloth. $5,000. It was a pathetic amount, barely enough to cover the cost of the suit Ethan was wearing. But to them it was a king's ransom thrown at a beggar. I slowly pushed the check back toward Richard. The paper made a soft scratching sound against the fabric. "I am sorry, Richard," I said, keeping my voice low and trembling. "But I cannot accept this. It is not about the money. I promised my father on his deathbed that I would never sell that land. He worked his whole life to buy it. He wanted it to stay in the family name. It is the only thing I have left of him." The air in the private alcove dropped 20 degrees. The sounds of the restaurant faded away, replaced by a ringing silence that screamed of danger. Richard stared at the rejected check. His face did not move, but his eyes grew dark. He looked at me, not with anger, but with the cold calculation of an exterminator looking at a stubborn cockroach. "So that is your final answer?" Richard asked, his voice dangerously calm. "You are going to let a sentimental promise to a dead man stand in the way of your daughter's future. You are going to choose a patch of dirt over your own family." "It is not like that," I pleaded, gripping the edge of the table. "I just want to keep my word." Catherine let out a sharp, short laugh. It sounded like glass breaking. She reached into her designer handbag, the leather creaking in the silence. She did not pull out a compact or a lipstick. She pulled out a manila envelope. It was thick. It looked official. She tossed it onto the table with a heavy thud right on top of my French onion soup. "Sentimental promises are for people who can afford them, Franklin," Catherine said, her voice dripping with venom. "And you simply cannot afford to be sentimental. In fact, you cannot afford much of anything." She tapped a manicured fingernail on the envelope. "Open it." I looked at Jasmine. She was shaking her head slightly, her eyes wide with panic. She knew what was inside. She had seen this threat coming, but she had been too afraid to tell me. I reached out and opened the envelope. Inside were medical documents, psychiatric evaluations. But as I scanned them, I realized they were all fake. They were forged documents from a doctor I had never heard of, detailing a history of severe mental instability, depression, and erratic behavior. The patient name on the top was not mine. It was Jasmine Rhodes. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Catherine leaned forward, her pearls clicking against the table. "That, Franklin, is proof. Proof that your daughter is mentally unfit to raise a child. We have statements from doctors, neighbors, even former colleagues. They all testify that Jasmine is unstable, that she is prone to outbursts, that she is a danger to herself and others." Jasmine let out a sob. She covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. "It is not true," she cried. "None of that is true. You made it all up." Ethan did not look at his wife. He picked up his wine glass and took a long sip, staring at the wall. Catherine ignored Jasmine's tears. She kept her eyes locked on mine. "In the state of New York, grandparents can petition for full custody if the mother is deemed unfit," Catherine continued, "especially if the father agrees. And Ethan agrees. Don't you, Ethan?" Ethan nodded slowly. He still did not look at Jasmine. "It is for the best, Jasmine," he said, robotically. "You have been very emotional lately. The hormones, the stress. Mom and Dad just want to make sure the baby is safe. We can visit on weekends." My blood ran cold. This was not just a negotiation. This was a hostage situation. They were threatening to steal my grandchild before it was even born. They were threatening to destroy my daughter's life, label her insane, and take everything from her just to get their hands on my land. "You cannot do this," I said, letting my shock show. "This is illegal. This is blackmail." Richard laughed. He picked up a breadstick and snapped it in half. "It is only blackmail if you have the power to stop it, Frank. Do you have the power? Do you have the money for lawyers? Do you have the connections to fight the Huntington family in court? We play golf with the family court judges. We donate to their campaigns. Who do you think they will believe? A wealthy, respected family concerned for a child's safety, or a broke retired dock worker and his hysterical daughter?" He pointed the broken breadstick at me. "Here's the deal, Frank. You sign the land transfer agreement right now. You sign it, and you smile, and you thank us. If you do that, these medical records disappear. We burn them. Jasmine gets to be a mother. You get to be a grandfather. We all live happily ever after. But if you walk out that door without signing, I file these papers tomorrow morning. Child Protective Services will be at Jasmine's door before the baby is even born." I looked at Jasmine. She was trembling so hard her chair was vibrating. She looked at me, her eyes begging me to save her. She did not care about the land. She did not care about the money. She just wanted her baby. She was terrified. Ethan finally turned to look at me. His face was devoid of shame. "Come on, Frank," he said. "Just sign the paper. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Do it for Jasmine. Do it for the baby. It is just dirt." I felt a wave of nausea, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of their evil. They were willing to gaslight their own daughter-in-law, willing to frame her as crazy, willing to traumatize her, all for a construction project. They were monsters in expensive suits. I needed to make them believe they had won. I needed them to think I was crushed, broken, and utterly defeated. Only then would they drop their guard. Only then could I destroy them completely. I let my shoulders collapse. I let my head hang low. I took off my glasses and wiped my eyes, making sure my hands were shaking visibly. I let out a ragged breath, a sound of pure despair. "Please," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Please do not take the baby. She is all I have. She is a good mother. She is not crazy." "Then sign," Catherine hissed. I reached for the pen. My hand hovered over the paper. I looked up at them one last time. "You promise," I asked, sounding like a child. "You promise you will burn those papers?" Richard smiled. It was the smile of a predator that had just caught its prey. "I am a man of my word, Frank. Just sign the damn paper." I nodded weakly. I put the pen to the paper. I pressed down hard, pretending to struggle with the decision, pretending that I was signing away my father's legacy. But inside my mind was racing. I was not signing a land transfer. I was signing their death warrant. I wrote my name, Franklin Rhodes. The signature was shaky, messy, the mark of a defeated man. I pushed the paper toward them. There I choked out. "It is yours. Just, please leave my daughter alone." Richard snatched the paper. He checked the signature. He grinned. "See," Richard said, tucking the contract into his jacket pocket. "That wasn't so hard, was it? You made the right choice, Frank. Finally." Ethan patted me on the back. It felt like being touched by a snake. "Good job, Frank. You saved the day." I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but not from age, from the weight of the anger I was carrying. I needed to get out of there. I needed to get to my phone. I need to go," I stammered. "I do not feel well." Catherine waved her hand dismissively. "Go ahead. We have things to celebrate. Ethan, order another bottle of champagne, the expensive one." I limped away from the table. I heard the pop of the cork behind me. I heard them laughing. They were celebrating their victory. They were toasting to their cleverness. They thought the game was over. They did not know that I had just started the clock on their destruction. As I walked through the restaurant, passing the oblivious diners, I wiped the fake tears from my eyes. My face hardened. The time for acting was over. Tomorrow they would meet the real Franklin Rhodes, and God have mercy on them, because I certainly would not. I excused myself from the table, clutching the contract to my chest like a shield. My bladder was fine, but I needed 5 minutes of silence to keep from strangling Richard with his own silk tie. As I stood up, the chair scraped loudly against the floor. Richard let out an exaggerated sigh, checking his watch again. "Make it quick, Frank," Richard snapped. "We do not have all night, and do not touch anything you do not have to. The fixtures in there are imported marble." I started to limp toward the hallway that led to the restrooms. I heard a chair slide back behind me. I did not need to turn around to know who it was. Richard was following me. He was escorting me like a prisoner, or perhaps like a toddler he did not trust not to wander off. I felt his presence looming over my shoulder, a heavy cloud of expensive cologne and arrogance. He walked briskly, forcing me to hurry my limping pace to avoid having him step on my heels. The hallway was lined with black and white photos of old New York. Richard pointed at one of a construction crew from the 1920s. "See that, Frank?" Richard said, his voice echoing in the narrow space. "That is what men used to look like. Strong, useful. They built this city. You just take up space in it." I kept my head down, focusing on the pattern of the carpet. "I am sorry to be such a trouble, Richard," I mumbled. "My leg acts up when it rains." "It is not raining, Frank," Richard sneered. "It is a clear night. You are just falling apart. It is pathetic, really. A man your age should have something to show for his life. Instead, you have a bad leg, a rusted truck, and a daughter you cannot even protect." He stopped at the door to the men's room and held it open, not out of politeness, but to usher me in faster. "Go on," Richard commanded. "I will wait right here, and leave the contract with me. I do not want you dropping it in the toilet." I clutched the paper tighter. "No," I whispered. "I will hold it. It makes me feel safer." Richard rolled his eyes. "Suit yourself. 2 minutes, Frank, or I am coming in to drag you out." I stepped into the restroom. It was opulent with floor-to-ceiling mirrors and gold faucets. I walked past the sinks and entered the handicap stall at the far end. I slid the lock shut. The metal bolt clicked into place with a sound that felt like a gunshot. The moment the lock clicked, the transformation began. I stood in the center of the spacious stall. I dropped the hunch in my shoulders. I straightened my spine, ignoring the dull ache in my knee. The pain was there, but it was no longer a master that dictated my posture. It was just fuel. I looked at the contract in my hand. I folded it neatly and placed it in my inside pocket right next to my heart. Then I reached into the hidden pocket of my trousers, the one sewn into the lining, and pulled out my phone. It was not the cracked flip phone I used in front of them. It was an encrypted satellite smartphone, a device used by heads of state and CEOs of multinational corporations. I pressed my thumb against the screen. It unlocked instantly. I dialed a number I knew by heart. 1 ring, 2 rings. "This is Rhodes," I said. My voice was no longer the wavering whisper of a frightened old man. It was deep, resonant, and cold as steel. It was the voice that had negotiated billion-dollar shipping contracts and crushed union strikes. "Mr. Rhodes," the voice of my chief of staff. Marcus came through the earpiece. "We were not expecting to hear from you until tomorrow. Is everything all right with the dinner?" "The dinner is a disaster, Marcus," I said, staring at my reflection in the chrome flush handle. "But business is about to pick up. I need you to execute a priority 1 search on the Huntington Family Trust and their associated holding companies. Specifically, look for their leverage ratios on the Riverfront Development Project." There was the sound of rapid typing on the other end. I waited, counting the seconds. I could hear Richard pacing outside the main door, his footsteps heavy and impatient. Sir Marcus set his voice tight. "I am pulling the data now. It looks bad. Very bad. They are over-leveraged by 400%. They have taken out high-interest bridge loans to cover the initial zoning permits. And, sir, they have missed their last 3 payments to the private equity firm backing them." I smiled. It was a cold, humorless smile. "Who holds the debt?" Marcus, I asked. "A shell company called Apex Capital," Marcus replied. "But they are looking to offload it. They consider it toxic." "Buy it," I commanded. Sir Marcus hesitated. "The debt is toxic. If the project fails, we lose the capital." I said, "Buy it." "Marcus," I repeated, my voice dropping lower. "Buy all of it. Every single cent of their debt. I want to own their mortgage. I want to own their car loans. I want to own the credit card debt for the shoes on Catherine's feet. Offer Apex Capital a premium for a same-day transfer. Use the emergency liquidity fund." "I understand," Marcus said. "Initiating the purchase now. It will take about 10 minutes to clear the wire transfers." "Do it in 5, I said. And Marcus digged deeper into Ethan. "I want to know where his discretionary spending is going. He is too well dressed for a man who misses loan payments." "Understood, sir. Anything else?" "Yes," I said. "Prepare the legal team. I want the sharks, Marcus, the ones we use for hostile takeovers. Have them meet me at the Huntington offices at 800 hours tomorrow. And bring my suit, the Navy bespoke. Consider it done, Mr. Rhodes." I hung up. I slipped the phone back into the hidden pocket. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive soap and impending victory. I checked my watch. 1 minute and 45 seconds had passed. I had just bought their lives while standing in a toilet stall, and they had no idea. I unlocked the stall door. I stepped out instantly, collapsing my frame back into the shape of a beaten dog. I shuffled to the sink and turned on the tap. I splashed water on my face, letting it drip down my chin to mask the lack of tears. I looked in the mirror. The eyes staring back were hard, but I softened them, letting the eyelids droop, letting the fear creep back in. The door to the restroom burst open. Richard stormed in. "Time is up, Frank," he barked. "What are you doing? You washing your sins away." "Just washing my hands, Richard," I stammered, drying my hands on a paper towel. Richard scoffed. He walked up to the urinal next to the sinks and unzipped his trousers without a shred of shame. He began to relieve himself while continuing to talk to me over his shoulder. You know, Frank, I almost feel sorry for you, Richard said. Almost. But then I remember that weakness is a choice. You chose to be a nobody, and now you are paying the price. I watched him. I watched the back of his expensive tuxedo. I watched the arrogance in his stance. I suppose you are right, Richard, I said quietly. I made my choices. I tossed the paper towel into the bin. As I walked past him, I paused. I leaned in slightly, just enough for him to hear me clearly over the sound of running water. By the way, Richard, I whispered, you missed a spot shaving, right under your chin. It looks sloppy. Richard flinched. He turned his head zip still down, a look of confusion on his face. I did not wait for a response. I limped out of the door, leaving him standing there with his pants undone. The walk back to the table felt different. The hallway was the same. The music was the same. But the air around me had changed. I was no longer walking to my execution. I was walking to my coronation. I approached the table. Catherine was laughing at something Ethan had said, her head thrown back, exposing her neck like a turkey waiting for the axe. Ethan was swirling his wine, looking smug. Jasmine was still staring at her lap, defeated. I sat down. The chair felt different now. It was no longer a corner of shame. It was an observation post. Did everything come out all right, Frank? Ethan asked, snickering at his own crude joke. Yes, Ethan, I said, placing the contract back on the table. Everything is moving along just fine. I picked up my spoon. The soup was cold. I ate it anyway. I watched them. I watched Richard return from the restroom looking flustered, checking his chin in the reflection of a spoon. I watched Catherine scold the waiter for a smudge on her glass. I watched Ethan check his phone every 30 seconds. I saw them for what they really were. They were not powerful. They were not elite. They were drowning. They were desperate people clinging to a raft of lies, and I had just bought the ocean they were floating on. I ate my cold soup and I smiled. It was a small, sad smile, the kind an old man gives when he is confused. But inside I was laughing. I was counting down the hours. Tonight I would let them sleep. I would let them dream of their condos and their millions. Because tomorrow when they woke up, the nightmare would begin, and I would be the monster under their bed. The waiter brought the contract back to the table along with a fresh bottle of wine. I picked up the pen again. My hand was shaking not from fear but from the adrenaline of the hunt. I looked at the document. I knew I had to stall. I needed 12 hours for my legal team to assemble the shark tank I was going to drop the Huntington family into. If I signed now, the game would end too simply. I needed them to walk into their own offices tomorrow thinking they owned the world, only to find out they did not even own the chairs they were sitting on. I adjusted my glasses, tilting my head to catch the dim light of the chandelier. I brought the paper so close to my nose that the ink smelled pungent and chemical. Section 4, paragraph 2. I read aloud, moving my lips with every syllable. The party of the first part hereby agrees to transfer all subsurface rights. I stopped. I looked up at Richard. Subsurface rights, I asked, scratching my chin with the back of the pen. Does that mean the worms? Are you buying the worms in the dirt too? Richard closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, his nostrils flaring. He looked like a kettle about to whistle. It means the minerals, Frank, Richard said through gritted teeth. It means if there is oil or gold under the dirt, we own that too. Not that there is anything under that wasteland, but rusted pipes and rat bones. Just keep reading, or better yet, just sign the bottom line. I went back to the paper. I traced the words with my index finger, moving painfully slowly. But what about the shed, I asked. My gardening tools are in the shed. Does this contract say I can keep my rake? Ethan slammed his hand on the table. The cutlery jumped. For God's sake, Frank, he shouted. We will buy you a new rake. We will buy you a golden rake. Just sign the stupid paper. We have been here for 2 hours. I looked at Jasmine. She flinched at her husband's outburst. She looked small and terrified. I am just trying to be careful, I said, my voice wavering. My father always said, read before you sign. You are doing this on purpose, Catherine hissed. She was cutting her steak with aggressive sawing motions. You are trying to annoy us into giving you more money. It will not work. 55,000. That is the cap. I am not asking for money, I said. I am asking for clarity. I turned the page. The paper crinkled loudly in the silence. I squinted at the fine print. Clause 7, I mumbled. Indemnification against environmental hazards. What is a hazard? Richard snapped. He reached across the table and grabbed the corner of the contract. "Give me that," he barked. "I will summarize it for you. It says, you give us the land, we give you the money, and you disappear from our lives until Christmas. That is what it says. Now sign." He let go of the paper, letting it flutter back down. I looked at them. They were red-faced, sweating, their masks of sophistication slipping to reveal the bullies underneath. It was time. It was time for the accident that would buy me the night. I reached for my water glass, but my hand was clumsy. I made sure of it. I let my arm jerk, effectively a spasm of old age and nerves. My hand did not find the water glass. Instead, the back of my hand struck the tall, full glass of Cabernet Sauvignon sitting right in front of Catherine. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the glass tip. I saw the dark red liquid launch into the air like a wave crashing against a shore. It was a beautiful arc of destruction. The wine hit Catherine square in the chest. It splashed across the bodice of her white Chanel dress. It soaked into the expensive fabric, instantly spreading like a fresh gunshot wound. It dripped down onto her pearl necklace. It splattered onto her chin. The silence that followed was absolute. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Then Catherine screamed. It was a high, piercing shriek that shattered the atmosphere of the fine dining establishment. She jumped up her chair, flying back and crashing into a waiter passing with a tray of desserts. "You idiot!" she screamed, looking down at herself. "You clumsy, useless idiot!" I stood up, knocking my own chair over. I grabbed a napkin and lunged forward, trying to help. "Oh my God!" I cried out. "Catherine, I am so sorry. I did not mean to. My hand, it just slipped." "Do not touch me," she shrieked, swatting my hand away. But I persisted. I dabbed at the stain, making it worse, rubbing the red wine deeper into the white silk. "Get away from me," she yelled. Then she did it. She lost all control. She pulled her arm back and swung. The slap was loud. It echoed off the walls. Her palm connected with my cheek with a stinging force that snapped my head to the side. My glasses flew off my face and skittered across the floor. I froze. I stayed there, my head turned, my cheek burning. I did not touch the spot where she hit me. I let the red mark bloom on my skin. I let everyone see it. The restaurant was dead silent. Every diner, every waiter, every busboy was looking at our table. They saw a wealthy woman in a ruined dress standing over an old, poorly dressed man she had just physically assaulted. Mom, Ethan gasped. He looked around, realizing the scene they had caused. Catherine was breathing hard, her chest heaving. She looked at her hand, then at me. She did not look sorry. She looked furious that I had made her lose composure. "Look what you made me do," she spat. "You ruined my dress. This dress cost more than your life." I slowly bent down to pick up my glasses. One of the lenses had popped out. I held the broken frames in my hands. I stood up, keeping my eyes on the floor. I let my shoulders shake. I let a single tear summoned from the memory of my late wife roll down my cheek. "I am sorry," I whispered. I am so clumsy. I am no good." Jasmine was crying openly now. She stood up and tried to come to me, but Ethan grabbed her arm and pulled her back down. "Sit down, Jasmine," Ethan commanded. "He is fine. He deserved it." I looked at Richard. He was not looking at me. He was signaling the waiter for the check, trying to salvage the night. "I cannot do this," I said, my voice trembling with fake hysteria. "I cannot sign. Not now. Look at me. I am a mess. My glasses are broken. I cannot see the lines. My hands are shaking too much." Richard glared at me. "Sign the paper, Frank. Do not use this as an excuse." I held up my hands. They were vibrating violently. I made sure of it. "I cannot," I cried. "Look, I cannot even hold the pen. Please, I need to go home. I need to take my medicine. I need to sleep." I turned to leave. "Wait," Ethan shouted. "Where are you going?" I stopped. I turned back to them. I looked at them with the eyes of a beaten dog that was asking for one last chance. "I will come to your office tomorrow," I said. "First thing in the morning, I promise. I will sign everything. I just need to calm down. I cannot think straight right now. Please, just let me go home." Richard looked at Catherine. She was busy dabbing at her dress with a wet cloth, muttering curses. He looked at the staring crowd. He knew he could not force me to sign here. Not with 50 witnesses watching an old man get abused. "Fine," Richard snapped. "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp, at our headquarters. And bring your own pen. I do not want you touching anything of ours ever again." "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you, Richard. I will be there. I promise." I turned and walked away. I limped past the silent tables. I felt their eyes on me. Some looked pitiful, some looked shocked. I kept my head down until I pushed through the glass doors and stepped out into the cold night air. The valet Kevin was standing there. He saw me holding my broken glasses. He saw the red mark on my cheek. For a moment his arrogant mask slipped and he looked almost sympathetic. "Rough night?" he asked. I stopped. I straightened my back. I took a deep breath of the fresh air. The trembling in my hands stopped instantly. "You have no idea, son," I said, my voice steady and deep. I walked to the public lot. I climbed into my truck. I tossed the broken glasses onto the passenger seat. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The red handprint on my cheek was vibrant. It throbbed. "Good," I said to myself. "Let it bruise. It will look perfect with my navy suit tomorrow." I started the engine. It roared to life. I drove out of the lot, leaving the restaurant and the Huntington family behind. They were probably arguing about the dry cleaning bill right now. They were probably blaming Jasmine for my clumsiness. They thought they had won a delay. They thought they had bullied me into submission. They did not know that the man who walked out of that restaurant was not Franklin the victim. He was Franklin the executioner. And 8 a.m. tomorrow was not a meeting. It was a sentencing hearing. I drove into the night, the city lights reflecting in my eyes, plotting every single word I would say when I walked into their boardroom and took everything they had. The silence inside the cab of my 1995 Ford pickup was louder than the rattling engine. The heater was blasting, but the air felt freezing. Beside me, Jasmine was curled into a ball, her knees pulled up to her chest, ruining the hem of her cheap floral dress. She was not crying anymore. She was vibrating with a mixture of shame and exhaustion. The streetlights of the city flickered past us, illuminating her face in brief, harsh flashes. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my eyes fixed on the road, but my mind was replaying the slap. I could still feel the phantom sting on my cheek. It was not pain. It was fuel. Suddenly, Jasmine slammed her hand against the dashboard. "Stop the truck!" she screamed. I pulled over to the curb, the brakes screeching in protest. Before the truck even came to a full halt, Jasmine turned to me. Her eyes were red-swollen and filled with a desperate, terrifying anger. "Why did you do that?" she cried, her voice cracking. "Why did you have to argue with them, Dad? Why did you have to make a scene?" I looked at her, keeping my voice calm. "Jasmine, they were insulting us. They were trying to steal from us." "They are always like that," she shouted, throwing her hands up. "That is who they are. They are powerful. They are rich. And we are nobody. Do you understand that? We are nobody. You dropping a glass of wine does not change that. It just makes them hate me more." She unbuckled her seatbelt and turned her body toward me, grabbing my arm. Her grip was tight, her fingernails digging into my worn jacket. "Dad, please." She begged, the anger dissolving into pure fear. "Just sell the land. Take the 50,000. Take whatever they give you. I cannot do this anymore. I cannot live like this. Every day is a battle. Every dinner is an interrogation. If you sell the land, maybe they will leave me alone. Maybe Ethan will look at me with love again instead of disappointment." I watched her. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. My strong, brilliant daughter, the architect who had graduated top of her class, had been reduced to this. A frightened woman begging her father to let himself be robbed just so her abusers would smile at her for one day. "It is not just about the land, Jasmine," I said softly. "It is about the land," she sobbed. "It is the only thing they want. Just give it to them, please. For the baby. Do you want them to take my baby? Do you want them to prove I am crazy? Because I feel crazy, Dad. I feel like I am losing my mind." Tonight, when Catherine looked at me, I felt like I was nothing. Like I was just an incubator for their heir. "If you sign that paper tomorrow, it stops. Please, just let them win." She buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with heavy, racking sobs. "I hate being poor," she whispered, her voice muffled by her palms. "I hate that we have to bow down to them. I hate that you drive this truck. I hate that I have to wear this dress. I hate that they are right about us." I reached out and placed my hand on her shoulder. She flinched as if she expected me to be angry, as if she expected me to be like Ethan. That reaction alone told me everything I needed to know about her marriage. "Jasmine, listen to me," I said, my voice firm. She shook her head, refusing to look up. "No. No more speeches about dignity, Dad. Dignity does not pay the rent. Dignity does not stop Catherine from looking at me like I am garbage." I grabbed her shoulders and turned her to face me. I forced her to look into my eyes. "Look at me," I commanded. She slowly lifted her head. Her mascara was running, creating dark streaks down her face. "You think we are poor?" I asked. "You think they are rich because they wear silk and drink expensive wine? You think they have power because they can yell at waiters?" "Yes," she whispered. Yes, they do. I let out a long breath. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to tell her that I could buy the entire Huntington estate with the contents of my checking account. I wanted to tell her that the truck she hated was a disguise, a filter I used to see who truly respected me. But I could not. Not yet. If I told her now in this state, she would not understand. She would be confused. Or worse, she might accidentally reveal it to Ethan before the trap snapped shut. Listen to me closely, I said, staring deep into her eyes. Tomorrow morning we are going to their office, and I am going to sign a paper. But it will not be the paper they think it is. She blinked, confused. What do you mean? I mean that things are not always what they seem, I said. You asked me to protect you. You asked me to save the baby. Do you trust me? I do not know, she stammered. I want to trust you, Dad, but look at us. What can we do against them? I smiled. It was the first real smile I had worn all night. We can do a lot, I said. Money is just paper, Jasmine. Power is knowing something your enemy does not. And tomorrow we are going to teach them a lesson about power. I need you to do something for me, I continued. Go home. Dry your tears. Do not fight with Ethan. Do not say a word about this conversation. Just tell him I am broken. Tell him I am terrified. Tell him I am ready to surrender. But you are, aren't you? She asked. You are surrendering. I squeezed her shoulder. Just tell him that. And tomorrow morning I want you to wear the blue suit, the one you wore to your graduation, the one you bought with your own money from your first internship. But Catherine hates that suit, she said. She says it makes me look like a secretary. I do not care what Catherine thinks, I said, my voice hardening. That suit makes you look like an architect. It makes you look like a professional. And tomorrow you are not going there as a wife. You are going there as a witness. A witness to what she asked. A witness to the truth, I said. Now let me drive you home. And Jasmine, hold your head up. You are a Rhodes. And starting tomorrow, that name is going to mean something very different in this town. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the road. Jasmine stayed silent, but her sobbing stopped. She leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, watching the city pass by. She did not know what was coming. She thought we were driving toward defeat. She did not know I was driving us toward a revolution. I dropped her off 2 blocks from the Huntington mansion at her request, so Ethan would not hear the truck. I watched her walk away, her silhouette small against the imposing gates of her husband's home. Once she was inside, I drove to my small rented apartment in the industrial district. I did not go inside to sleep. I parked the truck in the alleyway, killed the engine, and locked the doors. The cab of the truck was my war room. I pulled the secure satellite phone from my pocket. It was flashing with a red notification light. The data packet from Marcus had arrived. I opened the file. The screen glowed in the darkness, illuminating my face with a cold blue light. I began to read, and as I read, the picture became clear. It was not just bad, it was catastrophic. The Huntington family was not just in debt, they were drowning in a sea of financial incompetence and fraud. The dossier began with the Riverfront Development Project. It was their flagship endeavor, the one they bragged about in every society paper. But the numbers told a different story. They had projected a cost of $200 million. But due to mismanagement, bribery scandals with local contractors, and delays, the actual cost had ballooned to $400 million. I swiped to the next page, the financing. This was where it got interesting. To cover the cost overrun, Richard Huntington had taken out a series of bridge loans. These were short-term, high-interest loans meant to be a temporary fix. But he had not paid them back. Instead, he had refinanced them again and again, rolling the interest into the principal. It was a Ponzi scheme of debt, robbing one lender to pay another. And the collateral. I laughed out loud in the empty truck. It was a harsh barking sound. To secure these loans, Richard had put up everything. The mansion, the family yacht, the commercial buildings downtown, even Ethan's future inheritance. Every single asset they owned was cross-collateralized. If one domino fell, the entire chain would collapse. And the trigger for that collapse was right there on page 5. The primary lender, Apex Capital, had a covenant in the loan agreement. It stated that the Huntington Development Group must secure full unencumbered access to the deepwater port by the 1st of the month. If they failed to secure the access, the loan would be considered in default. The interest rate would jump to 30% retroactive to day one, and the lender would have the immediate right to seize all collateral. The access to the deep water port, my land, my 5 acres of weeds and rusted fences, I stared at the map attached to the file. My land sat right in the middle of their access road. Without my land, their trucks could not reach the construction site. Without my land, the city would not issue the final zoning permit. Without my land, they were in default. They were not trying to buy my land because they wanted to do me a favor. They were not trying to buy it because it was a good investment. They were trying to buy it because it was the only oxygen tank available for their dying empire. And they had offered me $50,000. I swiped to the next section. Ethan's personal finances. It was pathetic. Ethan had a salary of $200,000 a year on paper, but his credit card debt was over $300,000. He was spending money on gambling websites, luxury car leases, and worst of all, a recurring payment of $5,000 a month to an apartment rental in the Upper East Side, an apartment that was not occupied by Jasmine. I zoomed in on the tenant's name, Clara Miller, his mistress. My blood boiled, but my mind stayed cold. This was the ammunition I needed. Not only were they bankrupt, but they were morally bankrupt. Then came the final confirmation, the notification from Marcus. Transaction complete. Apex Capital Debt Portfolio acquired by Rhodes Logistics. Purchase price 80 cents on the dollar. Status active. You are now the primary lien holder of all Huntington assets. I leaned back in the seat, the leather creaking. I held the phone to my chest. I owned them. I owned the chair Richard sat in. I owned the bed Catherine slept in. I owned the car Ethan drove to meet his mistress. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It was 2 a.m. In 6 hours, I would walk into their office. They would be expecting a sheep. They would be expecting a broken old man to sign away his only asset for pennies. I closed my eyes, visualizing the moment. I would not just sign the paper. I would burn their world down. I would make them feel every ounce of humiliation they had inflicted on my daughter. I would make Richard beg. I would make Catherine cry. And I would make Ethan wish he had never been born. I started the truck again. The engine roared, sounding less like a dying animal and more like a waking beast. I needed to go home. I needed to shave. I needed to polish my shoes. And I needed to take the navy blue bespoke suit out of the plastic bag at the back of my closet. The poor naive father died tonight in that restaurant. Tomorrow the chairman rises. And the chairman does not forgive. The alarm clock on my bedside table was set for 6 a.m, but my eyes snapped open at 5. I did not need an alarm. I have not needed an alarm in 40 years. The internal clock of a man who built an empire from the dust up does not rely on batteries. It relies on ambition. I lay there for a moment in the darkness of my small rented apartment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant wail of a siren. To anyone looking in, I was just an old man in a lonely room waiting for the end of his days. But as I threw off the thin, scratchy blanket, I was not an old man. I was a coiled spring. I swung my legs out of bed and placed my feet on the cold linoleum floor. The chill shot up my legs, but I did not flinch. Yesterday at the restaurant, I had dragged my right leg like a dead weight. I had winced with every step, pretending that the old injury from the docks was crippling me. It was true that my knee was not what it used to be. The metal pins from the surgery in '95 still ached when the pressure dropped. But I was not a cripple. I stood up and I stood straight, my spine uncurled. The slump I had perfected for Richard and Catherine vanished. I walked to the center of the room. It was time to test the machinery. I dropped to the floor. 1, 2, 3. I pushed my body up and down in a steady rhythm. The push-ups were slow and controlled. I felt the muscles in my chest and arms tightening. They were not the bulky muscles of a gym rat like Ethan. They were the wiry, hardened muscles of a laborer turned tycoon. I counted to 50 before I stopped. I stood up and breathed in deeply through my nose, filling my lungs with the stale air of the apartment. I rolled my neck. Crack. The sound was satisfying. It was the sound of a weapon being loaded. I walked to the small, cracked mirror hanging over the sink. I looked at the face staring back. It was lined with wrinkles. The eyes were tired, but that was just the surface. Behind those eyes was a fire that had burned down competitors far more dangerous than the Huntington family. I splashed cold water on my face, washing away the sleep, washing away the lingering feeling of humiliation from the night before. Today, I needed to be sharp. Today, I needed to be lethal. I did not limp as I walked to the kitchen to boil water for my coffee. I moved with the silent, predatory grace of a tiger stalking through high grass. The limp would come back later when I needed it. But here in the sanctuary of my war room, I was strong, I was capable, and I was ready for violence. I drank my coffee black, standing by the window, looking out at the gray dawn breaking over the city. I watched the city wake up. I watched the trucks delivering goods. I watched the workers heading to the bus stops. I owned the company that operated those buses. I owned the logistics firm that managed those trucks. I owned the very concrete they were walking on. And yet the people I was going to meet today thought I was nothing. The irony tasted better than the coffee. I finished the cup and set it down. It was time to put on my armor. I went to the closet. It was a small, cramped space filled with the smell of mothballs and old cedar. Hanging in the front were my costumes, the faded flannel shirts, the stained khaki trousers, the worn-out work boots. These were the clothes Franklin the poor father wore. But pushed all the way to the back, hidden inside a nondescript garment bag, was the truth. I unzipped the bag. The scent of lavender and expensive wool wafted out, overpowering the mothballs. I pulled out the suit. It was a navy blue bespoke masterpiece tailored for me in Milan 3 years ago. The fabric was a Super 150 wool, so fine it felt like water against my fingers. I laid it on the bed. Next to it I placed a white dress shirt made of Egyptian cotton. I ran my hand over the crisp collar. I had not worn this suit since the day I rang the bell at the stock exchange when Rhodes Logistics went public. It was a suit for conquerors. I began the ritual of dressing. I shaved slowly and carefully, making sure my jawline was clean and sharp. I applied a splash of aftershave that smelled of sandalwood and leather. Not the cheap drugstore brand I usually wore to Sunday dinners, but the scent I wore to board meetings. I slipped on the shirt. The silkiness of the cotton against my skin was a stark contrast to the rough fabrics I had forced myself to wear for years. I buttoned it up all the way to the top. I did not wear a tie. I did not want to look like I was trying to impress them. I wanted to look like I owned the building. I stepped into the trousers. They fit perfectly, hugging my waist without the need for a belt. Then came the jacket. I slipped my arms into the sleeves and settled it onto my shoulders. The weight was comforting. It reshaped me. It made my shoulders look broader, my chest deeper. I looked in the mirror. Franklin, the dock worker, was gone. In his place stood Franklin Rhodes, the chairman. But the transformation was not complete. I reached into the pocket of the garment bag and pulled out a small velvet box. I opened it. Inside sat a Patek Philippe Nautilus with a blue dial. It was a watch that cost more than the Huntington family's entire car collection. I fastened it around my left wrist. The cold, heavy steel felt grounding. I admired the way the light caught the sapphire crystal. This watch was a symbol. It was a reminder of who I really was. Then I did the hardest part. I pulled the cuff of my shirt down, covering the watch completely. I reached for the old, stained khaki jacket I had worn the night before. I hesitated. It felt wrong to cover this magnificent suit with such a rag, but it was necessary. I put the khaki jacket on over the suit. It was tight and uncomfortable. It bunched up at the shoulders. I buttoned it up all the way to my chin, hiding the expensive shirt, hiding the silk, hiding the power. I looked in the mirror again. The illusion was perfect. To the naked eye, I looked like an old man wearing too many layers to keep out the cold. I looked bulky and shapeless. I looked poor. No one would guess that beneath the stains and the fraying threads lay a $5,000 suit and a fortune. I was a Trojan horse built of flesh and bone. I stooped my shoulders slightly, practicing the posture. I let my face go slack. I practiced the trembling hand. Perfect. I was ready to walk into the lion's den. Just as I was adjusting my collar, my phone buzzed on the wooden table. The vibration rattled the spoon in my empty coffee cup. I knew who it was before I even looked at the screen. The ringtone seemed aggressive, demanding. It was Ethan. I let it ring twice. 3 times. I wanted him to wait. I wanted him to sweat. On the 4th ring, I picked it up. "Hello?" I said, making my voice sound groggy and confused, as if I had just woken up. "Frank." "Where are you?" Ethan barked. He did not say good morning. His voice was high-pitched, tight with anxiety. "I am at home, Ethan," I said slowly. "I am just getting ready." "Getting ready," Ethan scoffed. "It is 7:30, Frank. The meeting is at 8. Do not tell me you are still in your pajamas. We have lawyers waiting. These people charge by the hour, Frank. $500 an hour. If you make them wait, I am taking it out of your $50,000. I smiled at the phone. He was worried about $500. He had no idea he was about to lose millions. I am leaving now, Ethan, I said. My truck. It takes a while to warm up in the cold. Take a cab, Ethan shouted. I will pay for it. Just get here. And Frank, listen to me. I waited. The silence on the line was heavy with his arrogance. Yes, Ethan, I asked. Do not embarrass us today, he said, his voice dropping to a menacing hiss. I mean it. Yesterday was a disaster. The spilled wine, the crying, the broken glasses. Today you walk in, you sit down, you shut up, and you sign. Do not read the contract again. Do not ask about the gardening shed. Do not ask for water. Just sign your name and get out. Do you understand me? I felt a surge of cold rage. He was speaking to me like I was a naughty child. He was trying to crush whatever spirit he thought I had left. I understand, Ethan, I said softly. I will not say a word. I will just sign. Good, Ethan said. And Frank, bring your own pen. I meant what I said. I do not want you touching our office supplies. You probably have germs from that filthy apartment of yours. I looked down at the gold Mont Blanc fountain pen sitting in my inside pocket next to the Patek Philippe. Do not worry, Ethan, I said. I have a pen. It is a very special pen. Whatever, just get here, Ethan snapped and hung up. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. I did not feel angry anymore. I felt focused. His insults were just noise. They were the desperate barking of a small dog that thinks it is a wolf. He thought he was summoning a victim to the slaughter. He did not know he had just invited the executioner into his home. I grabbed my keys. I took one last look around my small apartment. Tonight, when I returned, I would no longer need to pretend. Tonight, this apartment would just be a memory. I walked out the door and locked it. I walked down the stairs, my footsteps heavy and deliberate. I climbed into my truck. The engine roared to life. I did not turn on the radio. I needed silence. I needed to concentrate on the look on Richard's face when I took off the khaki jacket. I needed to visualize the terror in Catherine's eyes when I revealed the debt documents. I drove through the city streets, merging with the morning traffic. I passed the construction site of the riverfront project. I saw the cranes standing idle. I saw the fences. I saw my land, the small patch of weeds that was holding up their entire world. I slowed down as I passed it. Enjoy it while you can, Richard, I whispered to the windshield. Because by noon, that land will be the only thing you do not own. I pressed the accelerator. The truck surged forward. I was not going to a meeting. I was going to a war, and I had brought the big guns. The preparation was over. The performance was about to begin, and this time I was writing the script. I parked my truck 2 blocks away from the Huntington headquarters. I did not want them to see it, not because I was ashamed of it, but because I wanted to walk the last few hundred yards. I needed to feel the pavement of the city under my feet. The morning air was crisp and biting. I pulled the collar of my stained khaki jacket up higher, hiding the silk collar of my shirt. I walked with my head down, dragging my right leg just enough to sell the limp. To the people rushing by with their briefcases and coffees, I was invisible. I was just an old man in dirty clothes, an obstacle to be stepped around. They had no idea that the man they were ignoring was the man who signed their paychecks. The Huntington building rose out of the concrete like a shard of black glass. It was 50 stories of vanity. As I stood at the base of the tower, I looked up. I could see the cracks in the facade that they tried to hide. I could see the windows that had not been cleaned in months because they could not afford the maintenance crew. To an untrained eye, it looked impressive. To me, it looked like a tombstone. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped into the lobby. The lobby was cavernous, smelling of lemon polish and intimidation. Security guards in black uniforms stood by the elevators, their arms crossed, watching the flow of employees. I approached the front desk. The receptionist was a young woman with a headset typing furiously. She did not look up when I stopped in front of her. I waited. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. I cleared my throat, a dry, raspy sound. "Excuse me, miss," I said, keeping my voice low and humble. She held up a finger without looking at me. 1 minute, she said into her headset. "No, tell him the flowers must be white. Catherine hates lilies." "Yes. Goodbye." She finally looked up. Her eyes scanned my jacket, my work boots, and the stubble on my chin. Her expression shifted from professional boredom to active annoyance. "Deliveries are in the back," she said, pointing a manicured finger toward the service entrance. "You need to go around the corner to the loading dock." "I am not a delivery man," I said, clutching my hat in my hands. "I have a meeting." With Mr. Richard Huntington. And Mr. Ethan. The receptionist laughed. It was a short disbelief sound. You have a meeting with the CEO. Yes, ma'am, I said. My name is Franklin Rhodes. It is for 8 o'clock. She looked at her computer screen, typing my name with aggressive keystrokes. She frowned. She checked it again. I do not see a Franklin Rhodes in the visitor log, she said. But I do see a note here from Ethan Huntington. It says, let the old man in, but do not let him wander. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. She reached under the desk and pulled out a visitor badge. It was a plastic clip-on tag that was bright orange. It stood out like a warning sign. Clip this to your jacket where it is visible, she commanded. Do not take it off, and do not touch the artwork. Sit on that bench over there. Mr. Huntington will come down to get you. He specifically said you are not allowed up in the elevators alone. I took the badge. I clipped it to my lapel. I walked over to the bench she pointed to. It was a sleek, modern slab of marble that looked uncomfortable. I sat down. The stone was cold through my trousers. I watched the employees bustling past. I saw the fear in their eyes. They walked fast, heads down, afraid to stop, afraid to be noticed. This was a company ruled by fear. I checked my watch under my sleeve, 7:55. 5 minutes later, the elevator doors chimed. Ethan stepped out. He looked impeccable in a gray pinstripe suit, but his eyes were bloodshot. He had not slept. When he saw me sitting on the bench, his face twisted into a grimace. He walked over to me, looking around to make sure no important clients were watching. You are here, Ethan hissed. Stand up. You look like a homeless person sleeping on a park bench. I stood up slowly, leaning heavily on my bad leg. Good morning, Ethan, I said. Keep your voice down, he snapped. Come on, everyone is waiting. And for God's sake, button that jacket. I can see your undershirt. He did not know he was looking at a $500 Egyptian cotton dress shirt. He just saw what he wanted to see. He grabbed my arm and steered me toward the elevators. The security guard, a large man named Greg, according to his tag, stepped forward to block us. Mr. Huntington, Greg said. Is this individual with you? Yes, Greg. Ethan sighed. Unfortunately, he is with me. He is a charity case. Family business. Just let us through. Greg stepped aside, looking me up and down with distaste. We stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut, sealing us in a box of mirrors and silence. Ethan immediately pulled out his phone and started checking his reflection. He adjusted his tie. He smoothed his hair. He did not look at me. Remember the plan, Frank, Ethan said to his reflection. You go in. You sit at the end of the table. You listen to the lawyers. They will explain where to sign. You sign. Then I give you a check for $55,000. Then you leave. No stories about the docks. No asking for water. No crying. I watched him in the mirror. I saw the sweat on his upper lip. I saw the tremor in his hands. I understand, Ethan, I said softly. I just want to get this over with. Good, Ethan said. Because after today, things are going to change. We are going to be very busy with the construction. We probably will not have time to see you for a few months. Maybe we will see you at Christmas. He was cutting me out. He was taking my land and then throwing me in the trash. That sounds fair, I said. Christmas is a nice time for miracles. The elevator chimed at the 50th floor. The doors opened. We stepped out into a reception area that screamed excessive wealth. The floors were Italian marble. The walls were paneled in mahogany. A massive oil painting of Richard Huntington hung behind the desk, looking down on everyone like a dictator. But I saw the details Ethan missed. I saw the dust on the baseboards. I saw the dying orchids in the vase. I smelled the stale air of a ventilation system that had not been serviced. This was a kingdom in decay. Ethan led me down a long hallway to the main boardroom. The double doors were made of frosted glass. He pushed them open. The room was freezing. The air conditioning was set to Arctic temperatures, a classic negotiation tactic to make the other party uncomfortable. At the far end of a 20-foot-long table sat Richard Huntington. He was flanked by 3 lawyers in sharp black suits. They looked like vultures waiting for a carcass. Catherine was there too, sitting to the side wearing sunglasses indoors. She was nursing a hangover and a grudge. They all stopped talking when I entered. 6 pairs of eyes locked onto my dirty jacket and my orange visitor badge. You are late, Richard barked from the head of the table. He did not check his watch. He just wanted to assert dominance. It is 8 o'clock exactly, Richard, I said, limping toward the chair at the far end of the table. The chair was noticeably smaller than the others. It was a folding metal chair placed at the very edge of the room, separated from the main table by a few feet. They had set the stage to make me feel small, to make me feel isolated. "Sit down," Frank Richard commanded. "Let us skip the pleasantries. These gentlemen are from the firm of Sterling and Cooper. They charge $1,000 an hour, so every minute you waste is costing me a fortune." I sat down on the metal chair. It was cold and hard. I placed my hat on my lap. I looked at the lawyers. They were young, hungry, and arrogant. They had stacks of files in front of them. They looked at me with boredom. They thought this was going to be a slam dunk. One of the lawyers, a man with slicked back hair and a gold tie, stood up. He picked up a thick document and walked over to me. He did not hand it to me. He dropped it on the small side table next to my chair. The thud echoed in the room. "Mr. Rhodes," the lawyer said, his voice smooth and patronizing. "This is the standard land transfer agreement. It incorporates all the terms we discussed last night. $55,000 payable upon signature. It also includes a liability waiver releasing the Huntington Development Group from any future claims." He pulled a pen from his pocket. It was a cheap plastic biro. He clicked it open and held it out to me. "Sign on the tabs marked with the red stickers," the lawyer said. "Initial the bottom of each page." I looked at the document. It was thick, at least 50 pages. "Do I get to read it?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The lawyer sighed. Richard groaned and slammed his hand on the table. "We went over this yesterday." "Frank," Richard shouted, "it is the same deal. Nothing has changed. Do not start with the reading nonsense again. You would not understand the legal terminology anyway. It is standard boilerplate." I looked at Ethan. He was standing by the window, refusing to make eye contact. I just want to be sure," I said. "Sign the paper," Frank Catherine said from behind her sunglasses. Her voice was scratchy. "Just sign it so I can go home and get a headache powder. My head is splitting." I reached out and took the document. My hands were shaking. I opened the first page. I pretended to struggle with the words. The lawyers exchanged smirks. They were checking their phones, texting their wives, planning their lunches. They had checked out. I turned the page, and then another. I stopped on page 5. My eyes narrowed. I stopped shaking. I read the clause again. It was a beautifully hidden trap. Clause 404, subsection B. It stated that the seller, meaning me, would remain liable for any environmental cleanup costs discovered after the sale up to 10 years. Since the land was an old industrial site, the cleanup could cost millions. They were not just buying the land for cheap. They were setting me up to be sued for the cleanup of their own construction mess. I turned to page 12. Another trap. A clause that waived my right to any future royalties if minerals were discovered. I turned to page 20. A tax evasion scheme disguised as a charitable donation credit in Richard's name. I closed the document. I placed it gently on the table. I did not pick up the cheap plastic pen the lawyer had offered. Instead, I reached into the inside pocket of my dirty khaki jacket. I pulled out my own pen. The Mont Blanc Meisterstück. The gold bands on the black resin caught the overhead lights. I saw the lawyer's eyes widen. He recognized the pen. It was a pen that cost more than his first car. I uncapped the pen. The sound was a crisp, satisfying click. "Is there a problem?" Frank Richard asked, sensing the change in the rhythm. "Why aren't you writing?" I looked up. For the first time since I walked into the building, I did not hunch my shoulders. I did not squint. I looked straight down the long mahogany table, locking eyes with Richard. "There are a few problems, Richard," I said. My voice was different. The waiver was gone. The rasp was gone. It was clear, deep, and authoritative. "What are you talking about?" Richard asked, sitting up straighter. I flipped the document open to page 5. I did not look at the text. I knew it by heart. Section 404, subsection B. I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls. "Indemnification of environmental hazards. This clause violates the New York State Brownfield Cleanup Program statutes. Specifically, you cannot transfer retroactive liability to a seller who has not occupied the premises for commercial use in the last decade." The room went dead silent. The lawyer with the slicked back hair dropped his phone. "Excuse me," the lawyer stammered. I flipped to page 12, section 7, paragraph 3. I continued my pace, accelerating. "Mineral rights forfeiture. You are citing a precedent from 1982 that was overturned in the case of State versus Anderson in 2005. This clause is unenforceable and bordering on fraudulent." I flipped to page 20. "And this," I said, tapping the paper with the gold nib of my pen. Section 9. You are structuring the payment as a consultancy fee rather than a capital gain to avoid the transfer tax. That is a felony, Richard. It is called tax evasion. And since I am the counterparty signing this would make me an accessory to a federal crime. Richard stood up. His face was purple. What the hell is this? He sputtered. How do you know that? Who wrote that down for you? I stood up. I pushed the metal folding chair away. It clattered to the floor. I did not look at it. I began to unbutton my dirty khaki jacket. No one wrote it down for me, Richard, I said. I know it because I wrote the compliance standards for this city's industrial zones 20 years ago. I shrugged the khaki jacket off my shoulders. It fell to the floor, a pile of dirty rags. Underneath the navy blue Italian wool shimmered in the fluorescent light. The bespoke fit accented my shoulders. The white Egyptian cotton shirt was crisp and blindingly bright. I adjusted my cuffs, letting the Patek Philippe slide into view. Ethan gasped. He backed away from the window until he hit the glass. Frank Ethan whispered, "What are you wearing?" "I'm not wearing a costume anymore, Ethan," I said coldly. I walked toward the main table. The lawyers scrambled to move their chairs back as if I were a physical threat. I walked to the head of the table right next to where Richard was standing. He looked at me, his eyes bulging, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked at my suit. He looked at my watch. He looked at the pen in my hand. He realized with a dawning horror that the predator he thought he was trapping was actually a much bigger beast. "Who are you?" Richard whispered, his voice trembling with fear. "You are just a dock worker." I smiled. It was the smile of a shark that had just bitten the boat in half. "I was never just a dock worker, Richard," I said, leaning in close. "I am the man who owns the docks. I am the man who owns the shipping lines that deliver your materials. And as of this morning, I am the man who owns the debt on this building, your house, and the chair you are standing in front of." I tossed the contract into the air. The pages scattered across the table like confetti. "Sit down, Richard," I commanded. My voice cracked like a whip. "We have a lot to discuss." And this time I brought my own contract. The doors to the boardroom burst open behind me. My team walked in, 5 lawyers in suits that cost more than Richard's car. They carried briefcases stamped with the Rhodes Logistics logo. They did not look at Richard. They looked at me. "Good morning, Mr. Chairman," my lead counsel said. "We have the foreclosure papers ready for your signature." I looked at Richard. He collapsed into his chair, defeated, small, and utterly ruined. "Shall we begin?" I asked. I sat down at the head of the table. And the real meeting began. The conference room was silent except for the humming of the air conditioning and the frantic tapping of Richard Huntington's foot against the leg of the mahogany table. I sat there holding the gold fountain pen Ethan had forced into my hand earlier. The contract lay before me, a sprawling mess of legal jargon designed to strip a naive man of his only asset. But I was not reading it like a naive man anymore. I was reading it like a surgeon looking for a tumor. I flipped the page, my movements precise and deliberate. The trembling hand I had faked at the restaurant was gone. The hunch in my shoulders had vanished. I sat perfectly still, my eyes scanning the indemnification clause on page 14. I looked up. Richard was staring at me. His face was a mask of impatience, but beneath it I could see a flicker of confusion. He had expected me to sign blindly. He had expected the broken old man who spilled soup on himself. Instead, he was watching someone who handled a legal document with the familiarity of a seasoned prosecutor. "Excuse me, Richard," I said, my voice dropping the wavering pitch of the grandfather and settling into a deep, resonant baritone. "I have a question about paragraph 12, section C. It states that the seller waives all rights to future litigation regarding environmental toxicity discovered post-transfer. However, based on the EPA ruling of 1998 regarding industrial zones in this district, that clause is unenforceable and bordering on criminal negligence." The room went dead still. Ethan stopped checking his phone. Catherine froze with her coffee cup halfway to her mouth. Richard blinked once, then twice. He looked at the contract, then back at me. The air in the room shifted instantly. It was no longer a transaction. It was a confrontation. "What did you just say?" Richard asked, his voice low and dangerous. I tapped the paper with the tip of the pen. I said, "Your contract is sloppy, Richard. You are trying to bypass federal regulations by shifting liability to a shell company that does not technically exist yet. I checked the state registry this morning. Huntington Holdings LLC was dissolved 3 weeks ago for tax evasion. You are asking me to sign a contract with a ghost." Richard stood up slowly. He placed his hands on the table, leaning over me like a vulture. But I did not flinch. I did not look away. I met his gaze with a cold, steely intensity that I had kept hidden for years. "Who are you?" Richard whispered. "I am just a retired dock worker," I replied, keeping my face impassive. "Just a man trying to protect his tomatoes." "No, you are not," Richard shouted, slamming his fist onto the table. "A dock worker does not know about EPA rulings. A dock worker does not know how to check state tax registries. A dock worker does not read a 40-page commercial real estate contract in 10 minutes and find the only loophole I tried to bury." He pointed a shaking finger at my face. "Who are you playing at, Frank? Did you hire a lawyer? Is someone feeding you lines through an earpiece? You think you are smart. You are just a senile old man parroting words you do not understand." "I understand perfectly, Richard," I said, leaning back in the leather chair. "I understand that you are desperate. I understand that this contract is not just a land grab, it is a lifeline. And I understand that you are terrified because the old fool you thought you could bully is suddenly speaking your language better than you do." Ethan jumped in, trying to regain control. "Dad, calm down. He probably just Googled some stuff last night. Frank, just sign the paper and stop pretending you are a lawyer. It is pathetic." I looked at Ethan. The boy who was cheating on my daughter. The boy who spent money he did not have. "I am not a lawyer, Ethan," I said softly. "I am the man who hires lawyers." Richard's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He walked around the table, closing the distance between us. He wanted to intimidate me physically. He wanted to use his height and his expensive suit to remind me of my place. "Listen to me, you miserable little liar," Richard hissed, standing right next to me. "I do not know what game you are playing, but it ends now. You are in my building. You are surrounded by my security. You are nothing but a speck of dirt on my shoe. Now pick up that pen and sign, or I will have you thrown out into the street, and I will make sure Jasmine never sees a dime of our money." I looked up at him. I looked at the sweat beading on his forehead. I looked at the fear in his eyes. He was not angry because I was resisting. He was angry because he sensed a predator in the room, and he could not understand why the predator looked like a prey. "You are right, Richard," I said, standing up. I stood up slowly, unfolding my frame to its full height. My knee did not buckle. My back did not bend. I stood taller than him. I looked down at him. This game does end now. I reached for the buttons of my old stained khaki jacket, the jacket that had defined me in their eyes for 5 years, the jacket that smelled of oil and poverty, the jacket that was my shield and my disguise. "What are you doing?" Catherine asked, her voice shrill with panic. "I am getting comfortable, Catherine," I said. "It is getting a little hot in here. Don't you think?" I undid the last button. I shrugged my shoulders and let the khaki jacket slide down my arms. It hit the floor with a soft thud. A pile of dirty fabric. A pile of lies. Underneath, I was wearing the navy blue bespoke suit from Milan. The fabric caught the light, shimmering with the quality that only money and power can buy. The cut was perfect, accentuating the broad shoulders of a man who had built bridges and moved mountains. The white Egyptian cotton shirt was crisp and blindingly bright against the dark wool. I saw their eyes widen. They scanned me from top to bottom. They looked at the hand-stitched lapels. They looked at the silk tie I had slipped on in the truck. They looked at the way I stood. The transformation was absolute. The hunched, fearful old man was gone. In his place stood a titan of industry. But I was not done. I raised my left hand to adjust my cuff. The motion was deliberate. I let the sleeve of my jacket ride up just enough. The light from the chandelier hit the Patek Philippe Nautilus on my wrist. The steel and blue dial gleamed. It was unmistakable. It was not just a watch. It was a statement. It was a watch that cost more than Richard's car. It was a watch that you could not just buy, you had to be invited to buy. Catherine gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. She knew jewelry. She knew status. And she knew that a retired dock worker does not wear a $100,000 timepiece. Is that real?" she stammered, pointing at my wrist. "It is as real as the debt you owe Catherine," I said, my voice cold and hard. Richard took a step back. He looked at the suit. He looked at the watch. He looked at my face. The pieces were not fitting together in his mind. "Where did you steal that?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "Did you rob a house, Frank? Is that why you are acting so strange? You are a thief." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "I did not steal it, Richard. I earned it. While you were inheriting your father's money and squandering it on yachts and bad investments, I was building a logistics empire. While you were mocking my truck, I was signing checks that would buy and sell your entire company 3 times over. I reached into the inner pocket of my suit. I pulled out my secure satellite phone. I did not look at them. I looked at the screen. I pressed a single button. "Come in," I said into the phone. The voice command was short, sharp, and absolute. "Come in who?" Richard shouted, looking around the room wildly. "Who are you talking to? Security, get in here. Get this lunatic out of my office." Richard reached for the intercom on the wall, but before his finger could touch the button, the heavy double doors at the end of the conference room burst open. They did not just open. They were thrown open with force. 5 men and women marched in. They were not security guards. They were dressed in charcoal gray suits that cost more than the furniture in the room. They carried leather briefcases. They moved with a synchronized, terrifying efficiency. They did not look at Richard. They did not look at Ethan. They walked straight past the Huntington family as if they were invisible furniture. They walked straight to me. The lead attorney was Marcus, my chief legal counsel, a man who had negotiated mergers that reshaped the shipping industry. He stopped 3 feet in front of me. He snapped his heels together and bowed his head slightly. "Mr. Chairman," Marcus said, his voice clear and respectful, "the acquisition team is assembled. The paperwork is finalized. We are ready to proceed on your command." Mr. Chairman, Ethan whispered the words slipping out of his mouth like a prayer. I looked at the Huntingtons. They were huddled together at the far end of the table. They looked small. They looked confused. They looked like children who had wandered onto a battlefield. Richard looked at Marcus, then at me. "Chairman," he stammered. "Chairman of what? This is my building. These are my lawyers. You cannot just bring people in here." Marcus turned slowly to face Richard. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at Richard with the bored expression of a man who crushes companies before breakfast. "Actually, Mr. Huntington," Marcus said calmly, "this is not your building, or not as of 8:01 this morning. And these are not your lawyers. Your lawyers resigned 20 minutes ago when they realized your retainer check bounced. I am Marcus Sterling, Chief Legal Officer for Rhodes Logistics and Heavy Industries." "Rhodes Logistics," Richard whispered. The color drained from his face, leaving him gray and ashen. Rhodes Logistics, the shipping giant. He turned to me. His eyes were wide with horror. "Rhodes," he said. "Franklin Rhodes." I smiled. It was the smile of the wolf that had finally dropped the sheepskin. "Hello, Richard," I said, walking over to the head of the table. I pulled out the chair Richard usually sat in. I sat down. I placed my hands on the table, spreading my fingers to show the power and the control I now held. "I believe you have my seat." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and sweet. The balance of power had not just shifted, it had been obliterated. The poor, naive father was dead. The chairman had arrived. And the meeting was just beginning. The silence in the boardroom was heavy enough to crush a man. My chief legal counsel, Marcus, stood by my side like a statue carved from granite. He placed a single black folder on the mahogany table. The sound of the heavy leather binder hitting the wood echoed like a gunshot. Richard stared at the folder. He looked as if it were a bomb that was about to detonate. His hands were gripping the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles were white. Marcus adjusted his glasses and looked down at the trembling family. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He spoke with the calm, absolute authority of a man who knows he holds the winning hand in a high-stakes poker game. "Mr. Huntington," Marcus began. "At 7:45 this morning, Rhodes Logistics and Heavy Industries executed a block purchase agreement with Apex Capital. As you know, Apex held the primary mortgage on this building, the construction loans for the riverfront project, and the personal liens against your residential estates. They were quite eager to sell. In fact, they sold us the entire debt portfolio for 80 cents on the dollar." Richard blinked. He shook his head slowly as if trying to clear water from his ears. "I do not understand," he whispered. "You bought our loans. So what? We will just pay you. We will pay the monthly installments to you instead of Apex. What is the difference?" Marcus smiled. It was a thin, shark-like smile. "The difference, Mr. Huntington, is the default clause. According to the contract you signed with Apex 3 years ago, any change in the primary ownership of the debt triggers an immediate review of the collateral value. If the new lien holder deems the collateral insufficient or the borrower insolvent, they have the right to demand full repayment immediately." "Full repayment." Richard gasped. The air left his lungs. "Yes," Marcus continued. "As of this moment, Rhodes Logistics is exercising that right. We have reviewed your financials. Your assets are over-leveraged, your cash flow is negative, and your management is incompetent. Therefore, we are calling in the loan. The total amount due, including penalties and accrued interest, is $412 million. Marcus slid the black folder across the table. It stopped inches from Richard's hand. We will accept a wire transfer or a certified cashier's check, Marcus said, and we will need it by the end of business today. Ethan let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. 400 million. We do not have 400 million. Nobody has that kind of cash lying around. Then you are in default, Marcus said simply. And since you are in default, we are exercising our right to seize the collateral, which includes this building, the land, your equipment, and your personal homes. This is a joke, Richard shouted. He jumped up from his chair, knocking it over. It crashed loudly to the floor. This is a sick, twisted joke. You cannot do this. You cannot just walk in here and take my company. I built this. My father built this. You destroyed this, I said. My voice cut through his shouting like a blade. I sat comfortably in the chairman's seat watching him unravel. You gambled with money you did not have, Richard. You treated your company like a casino and your employees like chips, and now the house has come to collect. You are lying, Richard screamed. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You are a liar, Frank. You are a fraud. You do not have that kind of money. Apex would never sell to you. You are just a retired dock worker. This is a trick. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it twice before he could dial. I am calling Johnson, he yelled. I am calling the CEO of Apex. He is a personal friend. We play golf together. He will tell me this is all a lie. He will have you arrested for fraud. I sat back and interlaced my fingers. Go ahead, Richard. Call him. Put it on speaker. I would love to say hello to Johnson. I haven't spoken to him since I bought his wife a racehorse last year. Richard glared at me. He stabbed at the screen of his phone. He waited. The ringing sound echoed in the silent room. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Finally a voice answered. But it was not the warm, friendly voice of a golf buddy. It was the cold, hurried voice of a man who was busy counting money. This is Johnson, the voice said. Johnson, it is Richard. Richard Huntington. There was a pause on the other end. A long, uncomfortable pause. Richard, the voice said. I thought I told my secretary to block your number. Richard froze. What? Johnson, what are you talking about? Listen to me. There is a madman in my office. A guy named Franklin Rhodes. He claims he bought my debt. He claims he owns the note. Tell him he is crazy, Johnson. Tell him we have a deal. There was a sigh on the other end of the line. He is not crazy, Richard. Mr. Rhodes wired the funds this morning. The deal is done. We transferred the title and the liens at 8 a.m. But why? Richard screamed, his voice cracking. Why would you do that to me? We are friends. We are not friends, Richard, the voice snapped. We are business associates, and you are a bad investment. You have missed 3 payments, your project is stalled, and frankly, you are annoying. Mr. Rhodes offered me a clean exit, cash up front. I took it. But he is going to foreclose, Richard pleaded. He is going to take everything. That is between you and him now, Johnson said. Goodbye, Richard. Do not call this number again. The line went dead. Richard stood there holding the phone. He looked at the screen as if it had betrayed him. He looked at Ethan. He looked at Catherine. They were staring back at him with horror. The reality was sinking in. The safety net was gone. The old money prestige was gone. They were standing on a trapdoor and I had just pulled the lever. Richard lowered the phone slowly. He looked at me. His eyes were wide and glassy. He looked like a man who had just watched his house burn down. You really did it, he whispered. I did, I said. Richard collapsed back into his chair. Or rather, he tried to. But the chair was still on the floor where he had knocked it over. He stumbled and almost fell, catching himself on the edge of the table. It was a pathetic sight. The lion of the industry stumbling like a drunkard. Why, Richard asked, his voice trembling. Why go to all this trouble? Why the disguise? Why the fake truck? Why the dinner? If you wanted the company, why didn't you just make a hostile takeover bid months ago? Because I wanted to see who you really were, I said. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. I wanted to see if there was any redeeming quality in this family. I wanted to see if you treated people with respect. I wanted to see if you loved my daughter, or if you just loved her utility. I paused, letting my gaze drift to Ethan, and I found my answer. I continued. You are rot. You are decay wrapped in silk. You treated me like a dog because you thought I was poor. You treated Jasmine like a servant because you thought she was weak. You do not deserve this company. You do not deserve the loyalty of your workers. And you certainly do not deserve my mercy. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I checked my watch. It is now 8:15, I said. The transfer is official. I looked around the room. I looked at the expensive paintings on the walls. I looked at the view of the city skyline. I looked at the crystal decanters on the sideboard. This is a nice office, I said casually. The feng shui is a bit off, but the view is spectacular. I think I will keep it. In fact, I think I will make this my personal office when I am in town. I turned to Marcus. Marcus, issue the order. Marcus nodded. He pulled a document from his briefcase. Mr. Huntington, Mrs. Huntington, Ethan, Marcus announced. This is an immediate eviction notice. As the new owners of the property, Rhodes Logistics is exercising its right to secure the premises. You are trespassing. Trespassing, Catherine shrieked. She found her voice at last. This is my office. I decorated this room. You cannot just kick us out. We have personal items here. My laptop, my purse. I shook my head. Read the contract, Catherine, I said. The one you tried to make me sign. It says that in the event of default, all assets on the premises become the property of the lien holder. That includes the furniture, the computers, and yes, even the contents of the safe. But my purse, she cried, clutching her designer bag. I will let you keep the purse, I said. Consider it a parting gift. But everything else stays. The laptops stay. The phones stay. They are company property and you no longer work for the company. Security, I called out. The door opened again. 4 large men in black uniforms walked in. They were my personal security detail. They looked like walls of muscle. Escort these visitors off the premises, I said. Visitors, Richard sputtered. I am the CEO. Not anymore, I said. You are unemployed, Richard. And judging by your credit report, you are also homeless. One of the security guards stepped forward. He was a giant of a man named Tiny. He stopped in front of Richard. Sir Tiny said, his voice deep and rumble. If you could please step this way. Richard looked at Tiny. He looked at me. He looked at the window as if thinking about jumping. Then his shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him. He looked old, older than me. Come on, Richard. Catherine sobbed, grabbing his arm. Let's go. We will call a lawyer. We will sue him. You can try, I said, but make sure you find a lawyer who works for free. Because your accounts are frozen. Ethan was the last to move. He stood there staring at me. He looked like a child who had been caught stealing candy. Frank, he whimpered. Frank, please. Jasmine. Think about Jasmine. She is your daughter. This will kill her. I laughed. I walked around the table and stood right in front of him. I was inches from his face. I could smell the fear on him. You are wrong, Ethan, I said. This will not kill her. This will set her free. Jasmine is a Rhodes. She is a survivor. She will be just fine. But you, Ethan, you are going to learn what it is really like to be poor. You are going to learn what it is like to work for a living, and I have a feeling you are not going to like it. I pointed to the door. Now get out of my office. Ethan flinched. He turned and ran. He actually ran. He pushed past his parents and fled the room. Richard and Catherine followed him, dragging their feet, their heads bowed in shame. I watched them go. I watched the door close behind them. The silence returned to the room. But it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of victory. It was the silence of justice. I walked to the window. I looked down at the street. I saw 3 small figures walking out of the building. They looked lost. They looked confused. They were standing on the sidewalk waiting for a taxi because their cars had already been booted by my team. I took a deep breath. I felt light. I felt clean. The masquerade was over. The poor naive father was gone forever. I turned back to the room. I looked at Marcus. Get the cleaning crew in here, I said. I want this place scrubbed from top to bottom. It smells like greed in here. Yes, Mr. Chairman, Marcus said. And, Marcus, I added. Yes, sir. Order some flowers, white lilies, Jasmine's favorite. Send them to my daughter with a note. What should the note say, sir? I smiled. Tell her that the weeds have been pulled. It is time to plant the garden. The room was quiet now that Richard and Catherine had been escorted out. The air felt lighter, scrubbed clean of their toxic arrogance. But there was still one stain left on the carpet. Ethan stood near the door, his hand on the handle, but he did not leave. He watched his parents disappear down the hallway, and then he turned back. He looked at me sitting in the chairman's seat and realized that begging me was futile. I was a wall of stone. So he did what cowards always do. He turned to the person he thought was weak. He turned to Jasmine. Jasmine was standing by the window, her back to the room, her arms wrapped around herself. She was wearing the blue suit I had asked her to wear. It was sharp and professional, but her posture was still that of a broken wife. Ethan saw this. He saw an opening. He let go of the door handle and walked toward her. His steps were slow and hesitant, like a man approaching a frightened animal. Jasmine, Ethan whispered. His voice was trembling, filled with a manufactured vulnerability. Jasmine, baby, please look at me. Jasmine did not turn. She stiffened her knuckles, turning white as she gripped her own elbows. Ethan got closer. He reached out a hand to touch her shoulder, but stopped just inches away. He knew he was on thin ice. I know this looks bad, Ethan said, his voice gaining a desperate speed. I know my parents were harsh. I know I should have stood up for you, but you have to understand the pressure I was under. They controlled everything, Jasmine. The money, the house, my job. I was trapped. I only did what they told me because I wanted to protect us. I wanted to secure our future. He was gaslighting her. Even now, with his world crumbling, he was trying to twist reality to make himself the victim. I watched him from the table. I could have stopped him. I could have ordered security to drag him out. But I stayed silent. Jasmine needed to hear this. She needed to see the depths of his selfishness so she could finally let go. Ethan moved around her so he was standing in her line of sight. Jasmine looked down at the floor, refusing to meet his eyes. Ethan dropped to his knees. He did it dramatically, falling to the plush carpet with a heavy thud. He grabbed her hand. She tried to pull away, but he held on tight, pressing his face against her palm. Please, Jasmine, he sobbed. Don't let your father do this to us. We are a team. We are going to be parents. Think about the baby. Do you want our child to grow up without a father? Do you want to destroy our family over a business deal? Talk to him. Tell him to stop. He listens to you. Tell him to give us the house back. Tell him to forgive the debt. We can start over, just you and me. I watched Jasmine's face. For a second I saw a flicker of hesitation. It was the instinct of a woman who had been trained to forgive, trained to fix broken men. Ethan sensed it too. He squeezed her hand tighter. I love you, Jasmine, he lied. I have always loved you. You are the only good thing in my life. Don't leave me. Not now. I will change. I promise. I will be the husband you deserve. Just save me. Please. It was a pathetic performance, but to a heart that is starving for affection, even a poisoned crumb can look like a feast. I knew I had to intervene. Not with force, but with the truth. The kind of truth that burns everything to ash so that something new can grow. I cleared my throat. The sound was like a gavel striking wood. Get up, Ethan, I said. My voice was low, but it carried across the room with undeniable command. Ethan froze. He looked at me over his shoulder, his eyes wide with panic. Stay out of this. Frank, he hissed, his mask slipping for a fraction of a second. This is between me and my wife. No, I said, standing up. It is not. You are asking her to save you based on love, based on trust. You are claiming that you did everything for the family. I walked over to the wall where the control panel for the conference room was mounted. I pressed a button. The lights in the room dimmed. A large projection screen slowly descended from the ceiling, humming softly. I think Jasmine deserves to know exactly how you defined family while she was sitting at home alone, I said. Marcus I commanded, play the file. Marcus typed a command on his laptop. The screen flickered to life. It was not a spreadsheet. It was a series of photographs. High-resolution photographs taken by a private investigator I had hired 3 weeks ago. The first photo showed Ethan entering a luxury hotel in downtown Manhattan. He was not alone. He was with a woman. She was young blonde and wearing a dress that cost more than Jasmine's entire wardrobe. Her name was Clara Miller. Ethan gasped. He scrambled to his feet, releasing Jasmine's hand as if it burned him. What is this? Ethan shouted. This is fake. You photoshopped this. Jasmine, don't look. Jasmine looked. She could not look away. Her eyes were fixed on the screen. The next photo showed Ethan and Clara at dinner. They were laughing. Ethan was holding Clara's hand across the table, looking at her with an adoration he had never shown Jasmine. The next photo showed them entering an apartment building. The timestamp was from 2 days ago. 2 days ago when Ethan had told Jasmine he was working late to close a deal to save the company. He was working late, I said, my voice cutting through the dark room, but not on the business. Ethan turned to Jasmine. He was sweating profusely now. Jasmine, listen, it is not what it looks like. She is a client, a consultant. We were just discussing strategy. Strategy, I repeated. Marcus showed the financials. The image on the screen changed. It was a bank statement, but not Ethan's bank statement. It was a joint account. The account Jasmine had set up with her inheritance from her grandmother. The account she was saving for the baby's college fund. I walked closer to the screen, pointing at the highlighted lines. The Ritz-Carlton, $500. Tiffany & Company, $2,000. The Le Méridien Spa, $800. I turned to look at Ethan. He was backing away toward the wall, shaking his head. You didn't just cheat on her, Ethan. I said, my anger cold and precise. You funded your affair with your wife's money. You stole from your unborn child to buy gifts for your mistress. You stood there 5 minutes ago and talked about protecting the family, but you were the one robbing it blind. Jasmine made a sound. It was a sharp intake of breath, like she had been punched in the gut. She looked at the screen. She looked at the dates. She remembered those dates. The nights she sat up waiting for him. The nights he came home smelling of perfume and told her she was imagining things. The times he told her they couldn't afford a crib because money was tight while he was buying diamond earrings for Clara. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The man kneeling before her wasn't just weak. He was a predator. He was a thief. He was a monster. Ethan tried one last desperate gamble. He threw himself at Jasmine's feet again, grabbing the hem of her skirt. Jasmine, I am sorry. It was a mistake. It meant nothing. She meant nothing. I was stressed. I needed an escape. I will stop. I will never see her again. I swear. Just give me a chance. We can go to therapy. I will do whatever you want. Jasmine looked down at him. For a long moment, she did not move. The room was silent except for the hum of the projector and Ethan's ragged breathing. I held my breath. This was the moment. She could choose to be the victim or she could choose to be a Rhodes. Slowly, Jasmine reached down. Ethan looked up, hope flooding his face. He thought she was reaching to comfort him. He thought he had manipulated her one last time. But Jasmine did not touch his face. She grabbed his hands, which were clutching her skirt, and she peeled them off. She did it with a strength I didn't know she had. She shoved his hands away. Stand up, Jasmine said. Her voice was not loud, but it was steady. It was ice cold. Ethan blinked. What? Stand up, she repeated. I don't want you on your knees. I want to look you in the eye. Ethan scrambled up, wiping his face. He looked at her, searching for a sign of forgiveness. Babe, thank you. I knew you would understand. I knew you loved me. Jasmine stared at him. Her eyes were dry. The tears were gone. In their place was a clarity that was terrifying to behold. I did love you, Jasmine said. I loved you so much that I let you make me feel small. I let you tell me what to wear. I let your mother insult me. I let your father mock my dad. I endured it all because I thought you were my partner. I thought we were building something. She took a step closer to him. Ethan took a step back, intimidated by the sudden intensity radiating from her. But I was wrong, Jasmine continued. You are not my partner. You are a parasite. You fed on my love, my money, and my self-worth. You tried to erase me, and the worst part is, I almost let you. She looked at the screen at the picture of the hotel receipt. You stole from our baby, she whispered. That is the one thing I can never forgive. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, to spin another lie, but Jasmine didn't let him speak. She pulled her arm back. The movement was fluid and fast. The sound of the slap was louder than the one Catherine had delivered the night before. It was a crack that echoed through the boardroom like a whip. Jasmine's hand connected with Ethan's cheek with all the force of 3 years of suppressed rage. Ethan's head snapped to the side. He stumbled back, clutching his face. He looked at her in shock. He had never seen this woman before. He had married a mouse, and suddenly he was facing a lioness. Jasmine didn't shake her hand. She didn't apologize. She stood tall, her chin raised, looking down at him with absolute contempt. I want a divorce, she said. Ethan stammered. Jasmine, you can't be serious. The baby... My lawyer will be in touch, she interrupted. And don't worry about custody. After seeing this evidence, no judge in New York will let you within 50 feet of my child. She reached up and took off her wedding ring. It was a modest ring, one that Ethan had claimed was a family heirloom but was actually bought at a pawn shop. She looked at it for a second, then tossed it at his chest. It bounced off his tie and fell onto the carpet. You can sell that to pay for your hotel room tonight, Jasmine said. Because you are certainly not coming back to my house. She turned to me. Her face was pale, but her eyes were shining with a fierce, proud light. Dad, she said, I am ready to go now. I felt a lump in my throat. I had never been prouder of her. I walked over and put my arm around her shoulder. Let's go, sweetheart, I said. I looked at Ethan one last time. He was standing there holding his cheek, surrounded by images of his own betrayal. He was broken. He was bankrupt. And he was alone. Tiny, I called out to the security guard. Yes, Mr. Chairman. Tiny replied, stepping forward. Take out the trash, I said, pointing at Ethan. Tiny smiled. He grabbed Ethan by the collar of his expensive suit and dragged him toward the door. Ethan kicked and screamed, shouting my name, shouting Jasmine's name, but nobody listened. We watched as he was hauled out into the hallway, his cries fading as the heavy doors swung shut. The room was quiet again. I looked at Jasmine. She took a deep breath, smoothing the front of her blue suit. She looked at the projector screen, then at me. Did you really buy the debt, Dad? She asked softly. I did, I said. Every cent. And the company. I own it all. Jasmine nodded slowly. She walked over to the window and looked out at the city. Good, she said. Then we have a lot of work to do. I have some ideas for the riverfront project. If we are going to build it, we are going to build it right. I smiled. The weeds were gone. The garden was already starting to bloom, and the harvest was going to be magnificent. The sound of the sheriff pounding on the heavy oak door of the Huntington estate was louder than any thunderclap. It was 7 a.m, exactly 1 week after the meeting in the boardroom. I was not there to see it, but my security team sent me the video footage. I watched it with a cup of black coffee in my hand, feeling a sense of closure that was cold and hard like steel. Richard opened the door, still wearing his silk pajamas. He looked disheveled. His eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep and too much scotch. When he saw the sheriff standing there, flanked by 4 deputies, he tried to summon the ghost of his former authority. What is the meaning of this? Richard shouted, his voice cracking. Do you know who I am? I am Richard Huntington. Get off my porch. The sheriff did not blink. He held up a piece of paper. The eviction notice signed by a judge who used to play golf with Richard, but who now would not return his calls. We are here to execute a writ of possession, sir, the sheriff said calmly. You have been given 5 days to vacate. That time expired at midnight. You are now trespassing on private property owned by Rhodes Logistics. Trespassing, Richard screamed. This is my house. My father built this house. Not anymore, sir, the sheriff said, stepping forward. You have 10 minutes to gather your personal essentials. Medication and clothing only. Everything else stays. Furniture, art, electronics. It all belongs to the bank now. And the bank belongs to Mr. Rhodes. I watched as Catherine appeared behind Richard. She was not screaming. She was sobbing. She was clutching a jewelry box to her chest. A deputy gently took it from her hands. I am sorry, ma'am, the deputy said. That is listed as a secured asset. You cannot take it. But it is my mother's necklace, she wailed, reaching for it. It was bought with company funds, the deputy said. It stays. 10 minutes later, the great Huntington family was standing on the sidewalk. They were not leaving in a limousine. They were leaving in a taxi, and they were not carrying Louis Vuitton luggage. They were holding 3 black plastic garbage bags filled with socks, underwear, and a few toiletries. The neighbors were watching. People who had attended their parties, people who had drunk their wine and laughed at their jokes were now peering through their curtains. No one came out to help. No one offered them a place to stay. The smell of failure is contagious, and in their world, isolation is the ultimate punishment. Ethan was the last to come out. He was wearing a tracksuit that looked 2 sizes too big. He looked at the house one last time. He looked at the manicured lawn he used to brag about. Then he looked at the taxi. He climbed into the back seat, sitting between his weeping mother and his broken father. As the taxi pulled away, leaving them to a future of rented rooms and public transportation, I turned off the video. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it is just the sound of a taxi driving away into obscurity. That evening, the atmosphere was very different. I pulled my truck up to the entrance of Ciel. I had not sold the truck. I kept it as a reminder. But this time when I pulled up the valet, Kevin did not sneer. He did not tell me to park down the block. He sprinted to my door. He opened it with a flourish usually reserved for royalty. "Good evening, Mr. Chairman," Kevin said, bowing his head. "It is an honor to see you again." I stepped out wearing my navy suit. I handed him the keys. "Keep it close, Kevin," I said, placing a $100 bill in his hand. "And be careful with the clutch. She is sensitive." "I will guard it with my life, sir," Kevin said. I walked into the restaurant. Jasmine was waiting for me in the lobby. She looked radiant. She was wearing a soft yellow dress that showed off her baby bump. Her hair was loose and she was smiling. It was a real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes. The shadow of fear that had hung over her for 3 years was gone. "Dad," she said, hugging me tight. We walked into the dining room. The manager rushed over. He did not lead us to the corner table near the kitchen. He led us to the prime table by the floor to ceiling window overlooking the city skyline. The same table where Richard used to hold court. "The best table for you, Mr. Rhodes," the manager said, pulling out Jasmine's chair. "And congratulations on the acquisition. The staff is very excited to work for you. We have heard you offer excellent health benefits." I nodded. "Treat your people well and they will build your castle. Treat them poorly and they will open the gate for the enemy." We sat down. The view was breathtaking. The city lights twinkled below us like a sea of diamonds. But the most beautiful thing in the room was my daughter's face. I ordered the ribeye steak. Jasmine ordered the lobster. We did not look at the prices. We ate. We laughed. We talked about the baby. She told me she wanted to name him Franklin after me. I told her that was a terrible idea because I did not want the kid to be grumpy. Halfway through the meal, Jasmine reached across the table and took my hand. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. "Not for the money, but for saving me. I forgot who I was." "You reminded me." "You saved yourself, Jasmine," I said. "I just gave you the shovel. You were the one who dug yourself out." She looked out the window at the city. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably sitting in a cheap motel room realizing that the credit card in his pocket had been declined. I felt no pity. I only felt peace. The balance had been restored. The predators had become the prey, and the good people were finally eating at the big table. After dinner, I stood by the window looking out at the harbor. I could see the cranes of the port in the distance. They were moving, lifting containers, feeding the economy of the city. My cranes, my city. I thought about the khaki jacket hanging in my closet. I thought about the way Richard looked at it with disgust. He saw a piece of dirty cloth. I saw a badge of honor. People get confused about money. They think it is a destination. They think if they pile up enough cash, enough cars, and enough houses, they become better humans. But money is just a magnifying glass. If you are a good person, money makes you able to do more good. If you are a bad person, money just allows you to be a bigger monster. Richard and Catherine had millions, but they were spiritually bankrupt long before their bank accounts ran dry. They thought their worth was in their silk dresses and their Italian suits. But when you strip all that away, what is left? I looked at my reflection in the glass. I saw an old man with a bad leg. I saw a father. I saw a fighter. I touched the lapel of my bespoke suit. It felt nice, but it did not feel any better than the work shirt I wore when I earned my first paycheck. True wealth is not what you have in the bank. True wealth is the ability to walk into a room and know that you do not have to bow to anyone. True wealth is looking at your child and knowing she is safe. True wealth is sleeping soundly at night knowing that you earned every single thing you have. I turned back to Jasmine. She was waiting for me, ready to start her new life. "Let's go home, daughter," I said. "We have a garden to plant." And to you listening to my story, I have one question. If you had to choose between $1 million and the respect of the people you love, which would you pick? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed seeing justice served, hit that like button and subscribe. There are many more stories to tell, and I am just getting started. This is Franklin Rhodes signing off. See you in the next chapter. This story reminds us that true nobility is never found in bloodlines or bank accounts, but in the content of our character. The Huntingtons believed their wealth gave them the right to trample on others, failing to realize that arrogance is the quickest path to ruin. Franklin Rhodes showed us that dignity is a quiet power. You do not need to shout to be heard, and you do not need designer clothes to command respect. Ultimately, the way we treat those we perceive as powerless is the only true measure of our worth. Money can buy a house, but it can never buy a home, loyalty, or peace of mind. If you believe that integrity is the only currency that truly matters in this life, hit that subscribe button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today.